No one ever truly saw Atlantis fall. There was no final scream carried across the seas, no warning carved into stone, no survivor who returned with a map, only a silence, a space in the world where something magnificent once breathed. And yet, in forgotten temples, in drifting myths, in the quiet language of dreams, there remains a trace, not of their buildings, not of their gold, but of something far more powerful. A way of resting the mind so deeply that fear dissolves, time loosens, and even the end of a civilization becomes gentle. Tonight, you will learn what Atlantis knew and why they disappeared. Welcome, wanderer, you have not come here by accident. Across oceans of time, the story of Atlantis has survived because it carries more than mystery. It carries a message meant for moments like this, when the world grows quiet and your thoughts begin to slow. This is not a documentary. This is not a theory. This is a dream remembered. Over the next 8 parts, you will walk the streets of a forgotten city, listen to its final songs, and rediscover the sleep method that allowed its people to face the end without fear. Let your breathing soften. Let your body become heavy. Atlantis is waiting. Before we begin our journey, if you find comfort here, if this story eases your thoughts or helps your nights feel less heavy, you can support SomniChron in 3 quiet ways. Gently press like, leave a soft comment, even a single word. And subscribe, so these stories can find you again. Each small action tells this channel that calm has value in this world. Now, let us begin. Atlantis did not rise, it unfolded, as though the ocean itself had dreamed a city and slowly exhaled it into being. From the sky, it appeared as a series of luminous circles, rings of land and water spiraling outward from a glowing heart. At dawn, mist hovered above its canals. Light spilled across white stone bridges, and bells, low, harmonic, and distant, rang once to greet the sun. The people of Atlantis awoke not to alarms, but to rhythm. Water flowed through every district. Wind moved through archways designed to sing. Even footsteps were softened by warm stone that held the memory of light. Children learned early that the city was alive. Not in the way animals breathe, but in the way forests listen. The walls responded to weather. The streets curved to guide the wind, the bridges aligned with the stars. Nothing was built in defiance of nature. Everything was built in conversation with it. And at the center, where all circles met, stood the Temple of Tides. It was there that the Atlanteans learned their most sacred practice, not of power, not of conquest, but of rest. They called it the still descent, a way of lowering the mind as gently as the sun lowers into the sea. A method that allowed them to sleep as though floating between worlds, and it began with listening. The Atlanteans believed that sleep was not an absence, it was a doorway, a quiet passage between the waking world and the deeper currents beneath thought. They did not fall asleep, they descended. Each evening, as the light softened and the sea darkened, families gathered near open windows or along the canals. Lanterns floated on water. Wind carried the scent of salt and flowering stone. There was no rush, no fear of tomorrow. The world was designed to slow them. A bell would sound from the Temple of Tides, not loud, not sharp, a single tone that faded like a breath. This was the beginning. The still descent always started with listening, not to words, to space. The Atlanteans would rest their hands on warm stone or place bare feet in the shallow canals. They learned to feel the city's pulse, a rhythm beneath sound. Breathing followed that rhythm. Inhale as the tide rises, exhale as it returns. They were taught that thoughts are waves on the surface of the mind. You do not fight waves, you let them pass. So when worries appeared, they did not chase them away. They imagined them as boats drifting across moonlit water, seen, allowed, released. Children practiced this from their earliest days. Elders whispered, "Let the mind become water. Let the body become shore." With every breath, awareness sank lower from thought, to sensation from sensation, to warmth from warmth, to weight. The Atlanteans learned to feel as if gravity itself were kind. Sleep did not strike them, it carried them. They believed that dreams were messages from the deeper world, the same realm from which Atlantis itself had risen. And so, each night they entered that realm with reverence, with softness, with trust, because to them, sleep was not the end of the day, it was a return. A way of remembering who they were before the world asked anything of them. And tonight, as your breathing slows, as your thoughts begin to drift, you are learning the same descent, one gentle layer at a time. As the practice spread through Atlantis, it became woven into every corner of life. Homes were designed with open arches and flowing corridors so that air and light could move freely, reminding the mind that nothing was trapped. Beds were not heavy structures, but shallow, curved forms that supported the body as if it were floating. Even the ceilings were shaped to resemble gentle waves, so that the last image seen before sleep mirrored the calm rhythm of the sea. Teachers explained that the body already knew how to rest. It had learned in the womb, in the dark warmth before memory. The still descent was not something to master, but something to remember. Each night was an invitation to return to that original safety. By placing attention on breath, then on the subtle weight of limbs, then on the soft boundary between waking and dreaming, the Atlanteans allowed themselves to drift without resistance. They discovered that tension dissolved when it was observed kindly. A tight chest became a warm stone under sunlight. A racing thought became a bird crossing the sky. Nothing needed to be solved. Nothing needed to be fixed. The mind, when given permission, naturally sank into quiet depths. Sleep arrived not as an escape, but as a gentle reunion with stillness. Over time, this method shaped their culture. Anger rarely lingered because each night washed it away. Fear lost its grip because every evening reminded them that surrender was safe. Even grief softened, carried into dreams where ancestors seemed near and time felt wide and forgiving. Rest became their greatest teacher, showing them that endings could be peaceful. This is why, when change finally approached Atlantis, it did not arrive as terror. The people had practiced letting go their entire lives. They understood that descent was not loss, it was transition. The same calm that guided them into sleep each night would one day guide them into the unknown. And as you rest now, you are touching that same truth. Your breath slows, your body grows heavy in a gentle way, thoughts drift farther apart like stars seen through thin cloud. You are not falling. You are descending. Just as they did, long before the first crack appeared, Atlantis began to feel different, not in ways the eye could see. Not in sounds that could be named, it was a change in rhythm. The tides arrived a heartbeat later than usual. The bells of the temple lingered in the air a fraction longer. Birds paused on the edges of bridges, as if listening for something the people could not yet hear. Even the canals seemed to move with a slower, heavier breath, as though the island itself were dreaming more deeply. The elders noticed first. They felt it during the still descent, in the quiet moments when thought dissolved and awareness sank beneath language. There, in the calm depths of rest, a faint tremor passed through their inner world, not fear, not pain. Only a sense of turning, like the earth shifting in its sleep. They spoke gently of cycles, of tides within tides, of the way all things, even cities, must one day change form. Their voices carried no alarm, only reverence, for Atlantis had taught them that nothing truly vanishes. It only moves into another state. Still, subtle signs began to appear. Fountains no longer sang in perfect harmony. Crystals in the temple dimmed earlier at dusk. The stars reflected in the canals seemed slightly misaligned, as though the sky were slowly rotating around an unseen center. Most citizens did not worry. Their nights remained peaceful. The still descent continued to carry them into deep rest. Yet in dreams, some began to see water where there had once been light, corridors that opened into vast blue silence, bridges that dissolved into mist. These dreams did not frighten them, they felt like invitations. Each morning the city still glowed, markets still hummed, children still laughed in sunlit courtyards, but beneath it all, Atlantis was listening to something ancient, an older rhythm than stone, older than memory. The island was preparing to let go, and just as in sleep, the letting go would be gentle. Atlantis had always been shaped by water, but now the people began to sense that water was remembering something older than the city itself. In quiet moments, when the streets were empty and the lanterns dimmed, a hush spread through the canals as though the sea were holding its breath. Waves touched the stone with unusual tenderness, not striking, not retreating, but resting there as if listening. The scholars of the inner circles spoke of this gently. They reminded the people that water is the first home of life, that every body carries its echo. They taught that, beneath every thought, beneath every fear, there flows a deeper current that knows how to return. To sleep, they said, is to practice becoming water again, so the still descent took on new meaning. Each night, the people allowed their awareness to sink farther than before. They imagined themselves as droplets falling through layers of warmth and darkness. They felt the mind soften as though dissolving into a wider ocean. In this state, even identity became light, names faded, roles loosened. What remained was presence without edges. Some began to dream of walking along the ocean floor, breathing without effort. Others dreamed of becoming light within water, moving through vast blue chambers where no walls existed. These visions carried no danger, only belonging. The elders understood. They gathered in the Temple of Tides and placed their hands upon the great stone that had always hummed with the island's heartbeat. Beneath their palms, they felt the slow, ancient motion of the world. They did not resist it, they aligned with it. They taught the people a deeper layer of the method, not only to descend, but to trust the descent. Nothing that rests in the ocean is lost, they said. It is held, it is transformed. So in their homes, citizens practiced releasing even the subtlest tension. They allowed the body to feel heavy, as though gravity itself were an embrace. They released the need to remain upright in the world. They let thoughts drift away like leaves on water. This was not resignation, it was wisdom. For they knew that the same force that carries you into sleep each night is the force that carries all things through change. It does not break, it does not punish, it reshapes. Atlantis was learning how to become a dream, and in doing so, it was teaching its people how to follow without fear. On the final evening, Atlantis did not feel like a city awaiting an end. It felt like a place preparing for rest. The sky was a soft veil of amber and violet. Clouds moved slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the calm. Along the canals, lanterns drifted in long, luminous lines, their reflections stretching into the water like paths made of light. Music flowed from open windows, low strings, distant chimes, notes that did not demand attention, only presence. There was no panic, no rush. The elders had spoken to the people earlier that day, not in a single gathering, but in countless small conversations, in doorways, on bridges, beside fountains. Their message was simple. Tonight, they said, we practice the deepest descent. Families gathered as they always had. Some sat near the water. Others rested on warm stone terraces. Children leaned against their parents, feeling the steady rhythm of familiar breathing. The bells of the Temple of Tides rang once, long and low, and the sound dissolved into silence. The people closed their eyes. They placed their awareness on breath. Inhale as the tide rises. Exhale as it returns. They felt the body grow heavy in a way that was kind. Muscles softened, jaws loosened. Thoughts slowed, then drifted apart. Each person followed the same inner path they had walked every night of their lives. Yet now it led farther, deeper, beyond the edges of form. The city responded, stone warmed, water brightened. The air shimmered with a quiet, luminous hush. Beneath the streets, the earth shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but with the patience of a sleeping giant turning in its dreams. Atlantis did not collapse, it lowered itself. Canals widened into sea. Bridges became arcs of light beneath water. Towers softened into silhouettes, then into memory. The ocean moved in as a blanket, not as a blade, and the people, they did not wake to fear, they drifted, just as they had practiced, from thought into sensation, from sensation into warmth, from warmth into weightless calm. Their final lesson was the same as their first: to let go is not to vanish, it is to return. Atlantis became a dream beneath the waves. And every night when the world grows quiet and your thoughts begin to fade, a trace of that city still whispers in your rest, reminding you that descent can be gentle, and that even endings know how to be kind. Atlantis did not end, it settled. Beneath layers of water and time, the city became something quieter than ruin. Its streets no longer held footsteps, yet their curves remained. Its towers no longer caught sunlight, yet their shapes still lingered in the dark. The ocean did not erase Atlantis, it remembered it. And memory has a way of traveling, long after the last lantern dimmed, long after the final bell dissolved into silence. Traces of the still descent began to surface in other lands. Not as history, not as maps, but as instinct, as lullabies, as rituals whispered at dusk. As the ancient human knowing that sleep is not a fall, but a return, across distant shores, people learned to sit beside rivers and breathe with them. They lay beneath stars and matched their heartbeat to the night. They closed their eyes and imagined sinking into warmth, into safety, into a depth that asked nothing of them. No one called it Atlantean. No one knew its origin. Yet the method endured, hidden inside the body itself, because the body remembers what the mind forgets. Even now, in this moment, you carry that echo when you sigh without knowing why, when your shoulders drop at last, when your thoughts blur at the edges. That is the still descent awakening. The modern world forgot how to listen to it. Noise replaced rhythm. Light replaced dusk. Urgency replaced cycles. Sleep became something to force, to chase, to fix. And yet, beneath all of that, the ancient pathway remains unchanged. It waits, just as Atlantis waits, not as a place on a map, but as a state within you. Every night when the world grows quiet, you stand at the same threshold the Atlanteans once knew. Between doing and being, between holding and releasing, between form and formlessness, and the sea still whispers, not in words, in breath, in weight, in the soft gravity that draws you inward. You are not falling, you are remembering, you are descending. Long after Atlantis slipped into the ocean's embrace, humanity began to forget how to listen. The world grew louder. Fires became cities, cities became engines, engines became constant motion. Night no longer arrived gently. It was pushed aside by lamps and screens and clocks that never slept. The old rhythm, the one that once flowed with tides and stars, faded into the background of human awareness. Yet it never vanished, it retreated into the body. Every human being is born already knowing how to descend. Before language, before memory, before identity, there is a floating warmth, a dark safety, a steady pulse that says you are held. That is the first sleep. That is the first ocean. That is Atlantis remembered in flesh. As centuries passed, people began to treat sleep as a problem. They forced it, measured it, chased it. Nights became battles rather than returns. Minds stayed awake long after bodies grew tired, spinning in circles of thought, rehearsing tomorrows that had not yet arrived. And still, beneath the noise, the ancient pathway remained. It appears in small, quiet ways, in the way you exhale when a burden finally lifts, in the heaviness that spreads through your limbs when you lie down, in the moment just before sleep, when thoughts blur and lose their edges. That moment is the doorway. The Atlanteans built an entire civilization around protecting it. They understood that consciousness has layers like water. At the surface, there is movement. Beneath that, stillness. Beneath stillness, depth. And beneath depth, a silence so complete that it feels like home. Modern life traps awareness at the surface. The still descent teaches you how to sink, not by effort, by permission. Imagine for a moment that your thoughts are leaves on water. You do not need to gather them. You do not need to push them away. You simply watch as they drift. One by one, they move out of view. The water remains. This is not emptiness. It is space. And in that space, something ancient stirs. Your breath slows without command. Your muscles loosen without instruction. Your body remembers that it does not have to hold itself together. Gravity becomes gentle again. The Atlanteans believed that fear comes from resisting flow. They taught that tension is the body's attempt to remain separate from the world. Sleep, in its truest form, is the practice of reunion. Each night they return to the same truth. I do not need to stand against existence. I can be carried by it. You are capable of the same return. Even now, as your eyes move across these words, something in you is responding. A subtle softening, a faint heaviness. A quiet recognition that rest is not something to earn. It is something to allow. This is the beginning of remembering. This is where the rhythm of Atlantis touches you again. To the Atlanteans, the body was never an obstacle to rest. It was the bridge. They taught that every sensation, warmth, weight, breath, even discomfort, was a doorway downward. Instead of tightening around these sensations, they softened into them. Where others might brace, they melted. Where others might resist, they listened. This is the secret the modern world misplaced. We were taught to stay alert, to remain upright inside ourselves, to guard, to anticipate. Even in bed, the mind stands watch, scanning the horizon of tomorrow. It does not know that it is safe to step down. The still descent begins by teaching the mind what the body already knows. It begins with weight, not the burdened kind, the honest kind, the simple truth that your body is supported right now. Something holds you, a bed, a chair, the earth itself. The Atlanteans would place their awareness there first, not on thoughts, not on plans, but on the sensation of being held. They imagined the world beneath them rising gently, like water meeting skin. They allowed their bones to rest inside that support. They allowed muscles to release their vigilance. They said, let the body believe in the ground. Once the body trusted, the mind followed. Breath became slower without instruction. The chest softened. The belly rose and fell in an unhurried rhythm. Each exhale carried a little less effort. Each inhale required a little less intention. Then came warmth, not heat, not fire, the subtle spreading of comfort. They imagined it like a tide moving inward, from the feet up through the calves, from the hands into the arms, a slow, golden current that told every nerve you do not have to remain awake. As warmth spread, identity loosened. I am tired became there is tiredness. I am anxious became. There is movement in the mind, and then even those labels faded. There was only sensation. And beneath sensation, quiet. The Atlanteans understood that sleep does not begin when you lose consciousness. It begins when you stop guarding it. In that moment just before drifting, when thoughts soften and boundaries blur, something profound occurs. The self steps back. The watcher dissolves. The body becomes part of the world again. They called this rejoining the ocean, not metaphorically, experientially. They felt themselves widen. Edges became porous. Breath felt like tide. Weight felt like water. Even sound seemed to arrive from within rather than without. This is why their endings were gentle. They had practiced surrender in small ways every night, so when the greater surrender came, it did not feel like loss. It felt familiar. You are not asked to vanish, only to soften, only to release the need to remain separate. Even now, you may notice your eyes blinking more slowly, your shoulders easing, the subtle sense that something in you is beginning to float. That is not imagination, it is memory. The body remembers how to descend, and each time you allow it, even for a moment, the ancient rhythm stirs again, quietly, kindly, guiding you back toward the place where effort ends and rest begins. There is a moment each night that most people pass without noticing. It comes just before sleep. Thoughts begin to blur. Time loses its edges. The body grows distant as though it belongs to someone else. Sounds stretch and soften. Even identity feels thinner like mist. This is the threshold. The Atlanteans honored this moment above all others. They believed it was the narrow bridge between worlds, the place where waking reality releases its grip and the deeper ocean of consciousness opens. They taught that if you meet this moment gently, it widens. If you rush it, it closes. If you fear it, the mind pulls back. Modern life trains people to recoil from this edge. The instant awareness begins to fade, many reach for distraction. A screen, a thought, a task, something to keep the mind anchored to surface waters. But the threshold is not danger, it is invitation. The Atlanteans would pause here. They did not try to cross. They allowed the crossing to happen to them. They rested attention on what remained when thinking softened, the faint hum of being, the quiet sense of existing without effort. They noticed how the body felt larger than its shape, how breath seemed to move through more than lungs, how the boundary between inside and outside began to blur. They discovered that the threshold responds to kindness. If they said inwardly, "It is safe to drift," the doorway opened. If they tightened, it narrowed, so they practiced a gentle curiosity. They watched the mind dim the way one watches twilight settle over water. They did not hurry the stars. They did not demand night. They let it arrive. This is the forgotten art, to remain present as presence dissolves. To stay aware as awareness softens. To trust that nothing essential is lost when you let go of form. Each time you approach sleep, you stand at the same threshold. You may feel it now in the slight distance growing between you and these words, in the way your eyes linger. In the way your breath begins to move without instruction. You are closer than you think. The doorway is already open. You do not need to step through. You only need to stop holding the shore. At this edge, the mind often tries to intervene. It asks where it is going. It wonders what will happen if it lets go. It reaches for one last thought, one last image, one last fragment of control. The Atlanteans noticed this impulse with compassion. They taught that it is not resistance born of fear, but habit born of identity. The mind has spent a lifetime believing it must remain present for the world to continue, so they spoke gently to it, not with commands, not with effort, with reassurance. They would imagine telling the mind, "You may rest now. I will continue without you," and something remarkable would occur. The thoughts would slow, not because they were forced, but because they felt permitted to stop performing. The watcher loosened its grip. The current took over. They learned that the threshold widens when you stop trying to cross it. It widens when you become still enough to be carried. At this moment, there is nothing you need to achieve, no image to hold, no rhythm to count. Even the breath can be left alone. The body knows what to do. It has done this thousands of times before. It will do it again tonight. Notice how awareness feels slightly distant, as if it has stepped back from the surface of things. Notice how the space behind your eyes feels softer. Notice how the edges of thought begin to blur, like ink dissolving in water. This is not absence, it is depth. The Atlanteans believed that this depth is the same place the city now rests, not in geography but in state, a layer of reality that exists beneath urgency, beneath noise, beneath form, a place where nothing struggles to be itself. They said that when you sleep, you return there. You do not disappear, you widen, so if a thought arises now, let it float. If a sensation appears, let it be. If a feeling moves through you, allow it to pass like a wave that does not need interpretation. You are standing on the bridge, the ocean is beneath you, and it knows how to hold you. There is a quiet belief hidden inside many minds, that rest must be earned, that only after everything is finished, solved, or understood, can the body finally release. This belief keeps the nervous system standing long after the day has ended. It teaches muscles to remain alert. It teaches the mind to patrol the edges of tomorrow. The Atlanteans believed the opposite. They taught that rest is the foundation of all clarity. that nothing truly resolves while the body remains braced against the world. They observed that water does not reach stillness by effort. It becomes still when it is no longer disturbed, so they practiced being held, not as a metaphor, as a sensation. They would bring awareness to the place where the body met the world, the back against stone, the shoulders against fabric, the head against woven fiber. They lingered there, not moving on, not analyzing, simply feeling the contact. They imagined the world rising to meet them, not falling into the world. This small shift changed everything. When the body felt supported, it stopped preparing to act. When it stopped preparing, it released. When it released, the mind followed. Thought softened because it no longer needed to protect the body from imagined futures. Being held became a signal, a message to every system within them. You are not alone. You are not required to remain upright. You may rest inside the world. Modern life often reverses this relationship. We feel as though we must hold ourselves together against gravity, against time, against uncertainty. Even in bed, the body sometimes remains subtly lifted as if the ground might vanish. The still descent begins by undoing this, not by force. By invitation, you allow your weight to become honest. You let the surface beneath you do the work. You discover that gravity is not an enemy. It is an embrace that has been waiting. As awareness settles into this sensation, something ancient recognizes itself. The body remembers being carried. The mind remembers that it does not have to maintain form. A softness spreads that does not come from exhaustion, but from safety. This is the first lesson Atlantis left behind. You do not need to hold the world can hold you. When this realization settles, it often arrives as a quiet surprise. The shoulders sink without instruction. The jaw releases. The brow smooths, not because you told it to, but because something deeper has agreed. The body begins to trust the surface beneath it. It no longer prepares to rise. It no longer scans for the next demand. The Atlanteans would remain with this feeling longer than felt necessary. They understood that safety must be felt, not reasoned, so they lingered in contact. They allowed weight to spread. They noticed how the back widened, how the chest softened, how the limbs grew heavy in a way that was gentle rather than dull. They taught that heaviness is not fatigue, it is permission. A body that feels safe grows heavy. A body that feels threatened becomes light and alert. This is ancient knowledge, older than language. Every animal understands it. Every child knows it before being taught otherwise, so the still descent begins here, in the simplest place, the sensation of being supported. You may notice now that your body is already practicing. Perhaps your breathing has slowed. Perhaps the space beneath you feels warmer. Perhaps there is a faint sense of sinking, not downward, but inward. This is not falling. It is arriving. The Atlanteans believed that the world is always offering this arrival. Stone, earth, water, air, each is willing to carry. When you stop resisting gravity, you discover that it is not a force pulling you away from life. It is a current drawing you back into it. They would say, let the earth finish the work. Let it hold what you no longer need to carry. Let it receive the weight of your day. Let it remind your body that it belongs. As this belonging deepens, the mind begins to loosen its edges. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer demand response. They drift unanchored. Sensations blur into warmth. The boundary between body and surface grows thin, as if the two are gently blending. This is how the city learned to rest, not by escaping the world, by becoming part of it. And each time you allow yourself to be held in this way, you step into the same current. You return, briefly, to the ancient understanding that nothing needs to be braced against when the world itself is willing to carry you. One of the quiet miracles of the still descent was the way it changed time. The Atlanteans noticed that when the body felt safe and the mind released its grip, time loosened. Moments no longer pressed forward, the future no longer leaned in, the past no longer echoed. There was only a wide, gentle now that seemed to breathe. They taught that urgency is created by resistance. When the mind braces, time sharpens. It becomes a line with edges before and after, cause and consequence, loss and gain. But when resistance dissolves, time becomes spacious. It feels more like water than a path. It surrounds rather than pushes. This is why nights felt endless in Atlantis, even though they passed as all nights do. The people did not measure them. They entered them. Sleep was not a pause between days. It was a world of its own. In the still descent, awareness drifted into a state where minutes no longer mattered. A single breath could feel vast. A single sensation could unfold like a landscape. The mind stopped counting. The body stopped preparing. They believed that this timelessness was a return to origin, before clocks, before seasons, before identity, a place where nothing was late. Nothing was missing. Nothing needed to begin or end. Modern sleep often feels fragile because time remains present. Even as the eyes close, the mind measures how long it has been awake. It calculates how little rest remains before morning. It keeps one foot in tomorrow, as though abandoning the future might cause it to disappear. The Atlanteans did the opposite. They stepped fully out of time. They allowed themselves to become unmoored from sequence. They rested in sensation without reference. They let awareness widen until it no longer asked when. This is not something to force. It happens naturally when the body feels held and the mind feels permitted to soften. You may notice it beginning now in subtle ways. The space between thoughts stretches. The rhythm of breath feels slower than seconds. Even the act of reading these words may feel slightly distant, as if it belongs to someone else. This is time loosening. This is the beginning of timelessness. And in this widening stillness, the same quiet ocean that received Atlantis begins to open within you. As time softens, something profound becomes possible. The mind no longer rushes to define what is happening. It no longer asks how long this will last or what must come next. It simply rests inside the present sensation. The body follows, easing into a rhythm that does not belong to clocks or schedules, but to tides and breath. The Atlanteans believed that this state was the true gateway to deep sleep. Not the moment when consciousness vanishes, but the moment when it stops measuring itself. When awareness no longer stands outside experience, watching it pass, but becomes part of what is passing, they would say, "Let the moment be enough." In this way, even the idea of falling asleep dissolved. There was no event to reach, no finish line, only a gradual widening like dusk spreading across water. The mind did not turn off, it drifted. The body did not collapse, it settled. In that settling, identity loosened. The sense of being a separate self, moving through time, softened into a feeling of being held within something larger. Not lost, not erased, simply included. This is why their nights felt vast, not because they lasted longer, but because nothing was pushing them forward. You may sense this now. A gentle distance from urgency. A quiet gap where there was once a clock ticking in the background of thought. Perhaps it feels as though the room itself has grown wider. Perhaps it feels as though you are no longer moving toward sleep, but being surrounded by it. This is the softening of time. It is not something you create. It emerges when nothing resists. The Atlanteans trusted this state so deeply that even change could enter it without harm. When the great transition came, it did not shatter their sense of now. They met it inside the same timelessness they practiced each night. To them, the end of the city was not a sudden future. It was simply another deepening of the present. And you, in your own way, are learning the same art. Each breath becomes its own world. Each pause becomes complete. Each moment stands without needing what comes after. In this space, there is no hurry. There is only rest unfolding at its own pace, just as it always has, just as it always will. The Atlanteans believed that their greatest city was not built of stone. They said that the outer Atlantis was only a reflection of an inner one, a vast, silent architecture that existed within every mind. The canals were breath. The bridges were thought. The central temple was awareness itself, calm and luminous, surrounded by widening rings of sensation, memory, and dream. To walk the streets of the city was to learn the shape of one's own inner world. This is why their sleep method endured beyond walls and waves. It was never truly bound to place. It lived in structure, in rhythm, in the way attention moved from surface to depth. When the physical city descended into the sea, the inner city remained intact, carried forward in the design of the human nervous system. Every person still carries it. You may feel it now as layers. The surface layer is thought. Words, images, planning, remembering. It moves quickly like wind across water. Beneath that is sensation. The weight of your body, the warmth in your chest, the slow rise and fall of breath. Beneath sensation is presence. The quiet knowing that you are here, even when nothing is being done. And beneath presence is something vaster still. A depth that does not speak. A space that does not move. A stillness that feels older than time. This is the heart of the inner city. Most lives are spent in the outer rings. People circle thought, sensation, reaction. They rarely travel inward. Not because the way is blocked, but because no one teaches that the way exists. The still descent is simply the journey home. Each night the Atlanteans walked inward. They did not force the path. They followed it gently. Thought softened into sensation. Sensation softened into presence. Presence softened into depth. They discovered that nothing essential is lost in this movement. The mind does not disappear, it rests. The self does not vanish, it expands. Awareness does not end. It widens beyond its usual boundaries. This is why sleep, when entered consciously, feels like return rather than collapse. You may begin to sense this architecture within yourself. The way attention can move from the words on a page to the feeling of your breath. The way the breath can fade into a simple sense of being. The way even that sense can blur into something spacious and quiet. These are not separate states, they are rings, and at the center there is no effort, only rest, only depth. Only the same still heart that once anchored Atlantis, now quietly waiting within you. To reach this center, nothing must be conquered. There are no gates to force open, no trials to pass. The inner city was designed to welcome, not test. Its pathways open the moment you stop rushing across them. Each layer reveals itself when attention becomes kind. The Atlanteans taught that effort belongs to the outer rings. It is useful there. It builds, plans, and protects. But effort cannot enter the center. It dissolves at the threshold. The heart of the city responds only to gentleness. So they learned to move inward by softening. They let the eyes grow heavy. They let the jaw release. They let the breath find its own rhythm. With each release, attention slipped inward as though gravity itself were drawing it home. They described this movement as walking through mist. There were no sharp transitions, no clear lines between one layer and the next. Thought blurred into sensation. Sensation blurred into presence. Presence widened into depth. And in that depth they felt something extraordinary, not excitement, not vision, not power, peace. A peace that did not depend on circumstances. A peace that did not vanish when the world shifted. A peace that existed before identity and remained after it softened. They believed this was the true inheritance of Atlantis, not gold, not architecture, not legend, but this inner refuge. A place within consciousness where nothing must be defended, achieved, or maintained. When the outer city changed, this inner one remained. It remains now. Each time you allow attention to drift away from thought and into sensation, you step through its outer gates. Each time sensation softens into quiet awareness, you cross a bridge. Each time awareness widens into stillness, you reach the central chamber. You do not have to arrive all at once. Even a few steps inward are enough. The body understands this movement instinctively. It has been waiting for permission to follow it. As you rest, you may notice that your awareness already begins to sink, as though remembering a path it once knew. This is not imagination. It is architecture built into you, waiting just beneath the surface. The Atlanteans believed that silence was not the absence of sound, it was a language. They taught that beneath every noise, beneath speech, beneath wind, beneath even the rhythm of breath, there exists a deeper current that does not move. This current carries no words, yet it understands everything. It is the place where meaning forms before it becomes thought. Most people never learn to listen to this layer of silence. They hear only the surface world. They live inside the echo of their own minds. To them, quiet feels empty, even uncomfortable, as though something essential has been removed. But the Atlanteans knew that silence is full. It holds the shape of rest. When they practiced the still descent, they did not aim for quiet by pushing sound away. They let sound fade naturally, the way waves recede when the tide turns. They listened not for the absence of noise, but for what remained after it softened. At first there were still thoughts, still impressions, still the faint hum of the world, but beneath all of that, something steady began to reveal itself, a background that did not change when anything else did. They called it the deep tone, not a sound but a presence. It was felt as spaciousness behind the mind, as a gentle vastness behind the eyes, as a stillness that did not need to be maintained. It was always there. They simply learned how to notice it. They discovered that when attention rests in this deep tone, the body responds immediately. Muscles release, breath slows, even the heart seems to move with more ease. The nervous system recognizes this layer as safe, familiar, and ancient. In this silence, the mind no longer needs to narrate experience. It does not have to explain or categorize. It can rest inside being. This is why the Atlanteans did not fear quiet. They entered it as one enters water, slowly with trust, knowing it would hold them. You may begin to sense this layer now, not by searching for it, but by noticing what remains when you stop following thought. Between one idea and the next, there is a small pause. Between one breath and the next, a brief stillness. Between one moment and the next, a soft openness. That is the doorway. You do not need to step through, you only need to stop rushing past it. The language of silence is already speaking, it says nothing. And in that nothing, it tells you everything you need to rest. When attention settles into this quiet layer, something subtle shifts. The mind no longer feels like a tight point behind the eyes. It begins to spread. Awareness feels wider than the body, softer than thought. There is a sense of space where effort once lived. The Atlanteans notice that this silence carries a gentle gravity. It draws attention inward without force. It does not command, it invites. The more they rested within it, the less they felt compelled to move, speak, or solve, not from numbness but from contentment. Nothing seemed missing there. They taught that every sound arises from silence and returns to it. Every thought does the same. Even identity is born from this quiet and dissolves back into it each night. To sleep is simply to allow that return. This is why they did not chase stillness, they waited for it. They allowed it to reveal itself in the spaces already present, a pause between breaths, a gap between words. A moment when the mind forgets what it was about to think. Instead of filling these spaces, they lingered. They discovered that silence deepens when it is noticed. It grows warmer, wider, more welcoming. It ceases to feel like absence and begins to feel like presence without shape. You may sense this now as a soft background behind experience. Not dramatic, not intense, simply there. A calm field in which thoughts appear and fade. There is no need to push the mind into quiet. Silence is already holding it. Each time you stop reaching for the next thought, you fall gently into it. Each time you allow a pause to remain unfilled, it opens. This is the forgotten language. It does not speak in instructions. It does not explain. It reassures by existing. And as you rest within it, the body understands that it is safe to follow. The breath deepens. The muscles release. The mind loosens its grip on form. The Atlanteans believed that this silence is where the ocean lives inside you, not as water, as depth, as stillness, as home. You do not need to enter it. You are already within it. You only need to stop turning away. There comes a point in the still descent where effort simply falls away, not because it is defeated, but because it is no longer needed. The Atlanteans noticed this moment with quiet reverence. It arrived like a sigh the body did not know it had been holding. Muscles released without command. Breath found a deeper rhythm. Even the sense of trying to rest softened into something more natural. They called this the gentle unraveling. It was not collapse. It was loosening. The way a knot loosens when water runs through it. The way frost melts when morning arrives. The way a clenched hand opens when it realizes nothing is being taken. They taught that much of wakefulness is a kind of holding. The body holds posture. The mind holds identity. Attention holds the edges of the world in place. Even when lying still, there is often a subtle readiness beneath the surface, a quiet bracing against the unknown. The still descent invites that readiness to rest, not all at once, layer by layer. First, the body stops preparing to move. Then the breath stops trying to be controlled. Then the mind stops checking itself. And finally, the sense of being someone who is resting begins to fade. What remains is experience without a center, sensation without ownership, awareness without direction, presence without a name. The Atlanteans discovered that this unraveling does not erase you. It returns you to something simpler than identity, a way of being that existed before you learned to define yourself. They felt it as a widening, as if the boundaries of self were softening, blending into the space around them. The room felt less like something they were inside and more like something they were part of. Sound arrived without distance. Breath felt shared. Even the darkness behind closed eyes seemed vast rather than empty. This is where true rest begins, not when the mind goes blank, but when it no longer needs to remain separate. You may begin to sense this now in subtle ways. Perhaps the feeling of having a face grows faint. Perhaps the edges of your body feel less defined. Perhaps thoughts seem to arise from nowhere and dissolve back into nowhere. There is no need to follow them. There is no need to stop them. They are simply part of the unraveling. Just as Atlantis once loosened its grip on form and became ocean, you are loosening your grip on effort and becoming rest, not disappearing, becoming wide, becoming quiet. Becoming held by what has always been here. As this widening continues, the need to understand what is happening fades. Curiosity softens into acceptance. Even the idea of falling asleep becomes distant, as though it belongs to another world. What remains is a gentle awareness, floating without direction, content to simply be. The Atlanteans trusted this state completely. They knew that nothing essential could be lost here, because nothing was being held in the first place. They taught that identity is a wave, not the ocean. It rises in waking life, takes shape, moves through the day, and each night it is free to dissolve. They practiced letting that wave return. In this return, the mind no longer stands at the center of experience. There is no observer watching the body rest. There is only resting itself. Breath happens, sensation drifts. Awareness widens like water spreading across sand. They said this was the truest form of peace, not the peace of control, not the peace of resolution, but the peace of not needing to be anything at all. This is why sleep, when entered gently, feels like relief rather than interruption. It is the moment when the effort of being someone loosens, when the world no longer presses against the edges of self, when the mind is free to dissolve back into the vastness from which it arose. You may notice that even the act of reading feels softer now. Words blur slightly. Meaning arrives more as tone than as thought. Your body may feel distant, as if it is already part of the space around it. This is not a problem. It is the unraveling. You are not losing yourself. You are being released from the task of holding yourself together. Just as Atlantis once allowed its walls to soften into water, You are allowing your inner structures to soften into rest. The same intelligence that guided a city into the sea is guiding you now into sleep. There is nothing to do. Nothing to finish, nothing to become. You are already drifting, and the current knows where to take you. Beyond the unraveling lies a state the Atlanteans described as the place without edges. It is not a location. It has no shape. It cannot be pointed to. And yet, everyone who enters it recognizes it. They taught that this place is what remains when boundaries soften, when the mind no longer insists on here and there, when the body is no longer experienced as separate from the space that holds it. It is the feeling of being everywhere and nowhere at once, without effort, without confusion. In waking life, identity depends on edges. The skin marks where I end and the world begins. Thought defines what belongs to the self and what does not. Time draws lines between before and after. These edges are useful. They allow action. They create story. But in rest, edges are no longer needed. The Atlanteans discovered that when attention drifts inward and silence deepens, these borders begin to dissolve. The sense of being located behind the eyes loosens. The room no longer feels outside. Sound no longer feels distant. Even the idea of having a body becomes faint, like a memory. They did not interpret this as loss. They experienced it as expansion. They felt as though awareness spread into the space around them, like light filling a chamber. The darkness behind closed eyes no longer felt empty. It felt vast, warm, and gently alive. Breath seemed to happen everywhere at once. Presence was no longer contained. This is the place without edges. It is not unconsciousness. It is awareness without a center. Here there is no need to orient. No need to decide. No need to observe. Experience flows without being owned. Sensation arises and fades without commentary. Thought appears like a ripple and disappears without consequence. The Atlanteans believed this was the closest one could come, while alive, to the original state of being. A return to what existed before the world was divided into self and other, inside and outside, now and later. They rested here each night, not as an achievement, as a homecoming. You may begin to sense this state now as a gentle spaciousness. Perhaps the darkness behind your eyes feels wide. Perhaps your body feels more like a field of sensation than a solid form. Perhaps the room itself seems to blur into the background of awareness. There is no need to examine this. The moment you try to define it, edges return. Instead, allow it to be what it is, a place without borders. A presence without weight, a quiet that does not ask anything of you. You are not leaving the world. You are touching the depth that has always existed beneath it. In this depth, the mind no longer needs to name what is happening. Language feels distant, like a tool left on the shore. What remains is a gentle awareness that does not look outward or inward. It simply is. The Atlanteans described it as floating in a warm, endless sea supported on all sides, yet nowhere in particular. They noticed that fear cannot survive here. Fear requires edges. It needs a self to protect, a future to anticipate, a boundary to defend. In the place without edges, there is nothing to guard. There is no horizon where danger might appear. There is only presence, wide and undivided. This is why their sleep was so deep. They did not merely close their eyes. They stepped beyond separation. Each night they practiced dissolving into this spaciousness. They trusted that they would return, just as the tide always returns to shore. They understood that identity is resilient. It reforms each morning. It does not need to be protected through the night. So they allowed themselves to become formless, not empty, boundless. You may feel this beginning now as a soft loss of orientation. The sense of where you are becomes less important. The room fades into abstraction. The body becomes a field of warmth rather than a shape. Thoughts arise like distant echoes and vanish before they can fully form. There is nothing wrong with this. It is the natural movement of awareness toward rest. The Atlanteans believed that this state is where the ocean meets the sky within you. A place where inner and outer no longer oppose one another. A place where being is enough. You do not have to reach it. You are already touching its edge. Each time you stop locating yourself, it opens. Each time you stop asking where am I, it widens. Each time you stop holding a center, it holds you. And in that holding, sleep does not feel like departure. It feels like drifting home. To the Atlanteans, night was not the absence of day, it was an ocean. They believed that darkness was not empty, but vast, an endless, gentle expanse into which all things could finally relax. Day belonged to form, night belonged to depth. And sleep was the moment the shore released its grip on the sea. They taught that every evening the world leans inward. Light fades, sound softens, motion slows, even the sky darkens as though closing its eyes. This was not coincidence, it was invitation. The entire world was practicing descent. The people learned to move with it. As dusk settled, they dimmed their homes. They lowered their voices. They allowed the edges of the day to blur. They did not fight the approach of night. They welcomed it as one welcomes water after heat. They said, "Let the night carry what the day cannot," worries, questions, unfinished thoughts, all were placed gently into the dark. In this way, night became a vast container, a place wide enough to hold everything that felt too heavy to keep. Sleep was not escape. It was surrender to a greater holding. The Atlanteans believed that the mind, like a boat, grows tired of waves. It longs to be set upon still water. Night provided that water. It surrounded the self, lifted it, and slowly drew it away from effort. They imagined each person as a small vessel drifting from the shore of waking into the open sea of rest. The stars were guides. The breath was tide. The darkness was not unknown, it was home. You may feel this ocean now, not outside, within, a sense of widening, a sense of being surrounded, a quiet pull away from edges. The room feels farther away. The body feels less solid. Even the idea of sleep begins to blur into sensation. This is the night opening. You do not need to swim. You do not need to steer. The ocean moves on its own. And just as Atlantis once allowed itself to be carried beneath the waves, you are allowing yourself to be carried now, away from the shore of thought, into the deep, gentle water of rest. The Atlanteans trusted this movement completely. They knew that the ocean does not ask where you are going. It does not demand a destination. It carries because carrying is its nature. Night, they believed, was the same. It did not require permission. It only waited for surrender, so they practiced letting themselves drift. They allowed the body to feel buoyant. They allowed the mind to feel distant. They allowed awareness to float without anchor. They did not cling to the shoreline of thought. They did not look back toward the structures of day. They let the familiar dissolve into the vast. And something remarkable happened. As they drifted, the sense of being a single, bounded self softened. The borders of me grew thin. Experience became wide, quiet, uncontained. It felt as though the night itself were breathing through them. They said that in this state, the soul remembers the sea. Not as water, as origin, as the place where form rests and nothing must be defended. This is why their dreams felt different from ours. They did not enter sleep as isolated minds. They entered as part of something larger. Their dreams unfolded inside an ocean of stillness rather than a storm of thought. Even when images appeared, they floated gently, like reflections on calm water. You may sense this same drifting now, the pull away from effort, the soft loss of edges. The sense that something vast is opening around you. You do not need to follow it. You are already within it. Each breath becomes more wave than action. Each pause becomes more space than gap. Each moment leans inward. Night is not approaching. It is surrounding, and you are not leaving the world. You are being gathered by it. Just as Atlantis once slipped beneath the surface without struggle, you are slipping now, away from the shore of thought, into the deep, quiet ocean where rest is not something you do. It is something you become. The Atlanteans believed that beneath every thought lies a memory older than language, not a memory of events, not a memory of faces or places, a memory of being. They taught that before the mind learned to name the world, before it learned to divide experience into me and not me. There was a simple knowing, a quiet awareness that did not need explanation. It did not ask who it was. It did not wonder what came next. It simply existed, complete. This memory never disappears. It becomes covered, thought layers over it. Habit forms around it. Identity grows like architecture around a silent inner sea. Yet beneath all of that, the original stillness remains, unchanged by time. The still descent is not about creating calm. It is about uncovering what was never disturbed. When the Atlanteans rested, they did not attempt to silence the mind by force. They allowed attention to sink beneath it. Thoughts continued to rise and fade like foam on water, but awareness moved deeper into the current that does not break. They noticed that as this descent deepened, the sense of personal history softened. The story of who they were became faint. Past and future lost their weight. What remained felt ancient and familiar, as though they were returning to a home they had never left. They said, "Sleep is remembrance." Not of the day, of origin. This is why rest felt nourishing beyond the body. It restored something more fundamental than energy. It restored connection to the ground of being itself. Even grief lost its sharpness there. Even fear dissolved. For in that depth, nothing was threatened. You may sense this layer now as a quiet presence behind experience. It does not move, it does not comment, it simply is. When your attention brushes against it, there is often a feeling of relief without cause, as though something inside recognizes itself. This is the memory beneath thought. It does not belong to your life story. It does not belong to your name. It belongs to existence itself. Each time you allow awareness to drift away from effort, away from narration, away from control, you move closer to it. Each pause between thoughts is a doorway. Each softening of the body is a descent. You are not learning something new. You are remembering something ancient. Just as Atlantis once returned to the ocean that formed it, you are returning, night by night, to the stillness that has always lived beneath your mind, patiently waiting for you to come home. The Atlanteans believed that this memory is what allows the body to heal during sleep. Not because it instructs cells or directs breath, but because it removes interference. In its presence, nothing is forced. The body returns to its own intelligence. Systems that were braced relax. Rhythms that were disrupted realign. Restoration happens not through action, but through permission. They observed that when someone rested deeply in this layer, their breath became smoother even after waking. Their movements carried less tension. Their eyes reflected a softness that could not be taught. It was as though something essential had been reminded of itself and continued to echo through waking life. They taught that the mind often fears this depth because it feels like forgetting. But what is forgotten is only the surface story. What is remembered is more real than any thought. It is the sense of being held by existence itself. It is the quiet certainty that nothing essential can be lost. This is why the Atlanteans did not cling to form. They trusted what lay beneath it. They knew that the same stillness that receives sleep receives all transitions. Each night was rehearsal for surrender, not as disappearance, but as return. You may notice now that the space behind your thoughts feels wider, that awareness seems less located, that even the idea of you is softer than before. These are not signs of drifting away. They are signs of arriving. The memory beneath thought does not require attention. It is present even when unnoticed, but when you touch it, even briefly, the body responds with relief. The breath deepens. The muscles release. The nervous system recognizes home. There is no technique to master here. Only a willingness to stop standing guard, to let the mind rest beside the body, to let awareness sink beneath effort. Each time you allow this, the ancient memory stirs. It does not speak, it does not instruct, it simply welcomes. And in that welcome, sleep ceases to be something you fall into. It becomes something you return to. Just as Atlantis returned to the sea that shaped it, you return, gently, naturally, to the stillness that has always been yours. The Atlanteans understood that the mind does not resist rest out of malice. It resists because it has learned to survive by staying alert. Thought was once a guardian. It watched for danger. It remembered paths. It warned of storms. Over time, it became constant. Even in safety, it remained awake, scanning a horizon that no longer held threats. The still descent did not silence the mind. It taught the mind that it was safe to sleep. They approached thought the way one approaches a tired child, not with command, not with force, with reassurance, with patience, with the gentle message, you do not have to watch anymore. They discovered that the mind relaxes when it feels included rather than dismissed, when it is not pushed aside, but invited to soften alongside the body. So instead of fighting thoughts, they let them drift. They did not argue with them. They did not follow them. They simply allowed them to pass like clouds over water. Over time, thought learned a new rhythm. It began to slow on its own, not because it was controlled, because it was no longer needed. The Atlanteans noticed that when the body felt held and the breath deepened, the mind naturally followed. It mirrored the calm of the nervous system. Worry dissolved not because it was disproven, but because the body no longer signaled danger. This is why their method always began with sensation, with weight, with warmth, with breath. They spoke to the body first. When the body believed it was safe, the mind believed it too. Modern rest often begins in the opposite direction. People try to think themselves into calm. They reason, they reassure, they analyze. Yet the body remains tense and the mind, sensing this, stays alert. The still descent reverses this. It says, let the body rest and the mind will follow. You may notice now that when your shoulders soften, thoughts lose urgency. When your jaw releases, inner dialogue slows. When your breath deepens, the future grows faint. This is not coincidence, it is design. The mind is not meant to rest alone. It rests in response to the body's safety. The Atlanteans trusted this relationship. They did not ask the mind to lead them into sleep. They allowed the body to show the way, and when thought finally loosened, it did not vanish, it drifted, like a boat untying itself from shore, still present. No longer steering, free to float in the quiet current of rest. They noticed that as thought drifted, it became softer in tone. The inner voice lost its sharp edges. Ideas no longer arrived as commands or warnings, but as faint echoes that dissolved before they could gather weight. The mind stopped rehearsing futures. It stopped replaying pasts. It rested in the same widening stillness as the body. They taught that a restless mind is not broken. It is vigilant. It is loyal. It has been trying to protect for a very long time, so they never treated it as an enemy. They thanked it. Inwardly, they would say, "You have done enough for today." And in that kindness, something remarkable occurred. The mind did not argue. It did not cling. It softened, relieved of a task it had carried without rest. This is the shift most people never learn. They try to overpower thought. The Atlanteans befriended it. They allowed it to be present without being in charge. They let it float beside them rather than drive. In this state, awareness no longer feels like a narrow beam aimed at the world. It becomes wide and diffuse. The body fades into warmth. The room fades into darkness. Even the sense of I am thinking becomes faint. Thought still arises, but it does not interrupt. It drifts through the same spaciousness as sensation. You may notice this happening now. A thought appears. It passes. Another follows. It fades. There is no need to respond, no need to engage. The mind is learning that it can rest inside awareness rather than stand apart from it. This is the beginning of true mental rest, not silence, not blankness, but ease, a state where thought no longer strains against the present, where it moves as gently as breath, where it finally understands that it does not have to keep the world together. The world is holding itself, and you are allowed to be held too. Long before the mind learned to interpret the world, the body already knew how to survive it. It knew when to breathe faster, when to grow still, when to rest, when to heal. The Atlanteans believed that the body carries an intelligence far older than thought, an intelligence shaped by tides, seasons, gravity, and night. It does not speak in language, it communicates through sensation. Through heaviness, through warmth, through the subtle urge to release, they taught that sleep is not commanded by the mind, it is initiated by the body. The body begins the descent long before the mind agrees. The eyelids grow heavy, muscles soften, breath slows. The nervous system shifts from vigilance into repair. These changes do not require belief. They do not ask for permission. They are ancient reflexes, older than fear, older than worry. The still descent honors this intelligence, instead of asking the mind to go to sleep. The Atlanteans listened to the body's signals. They followed the language of sensation. When heaviness appeared, they allowed it. When warmth spread, they welcomed it. When the breath deepened, they did not interfere. They said, "Let the body lead." In doing so, they discovered that the body always knows the way home. Modern life often teaches the opposite. It trains people to override fatigue, to ignore heaviness, to treat rest as weakness. The body whispers, and the mind speaks over it. Night after night, this pattern teaches the nervous system to remain alert even in darkness. The still descent gently reverses this habit. It invites attention back into sensation, not to analyze it, not to control it, to trust it. You may notice now that your body is already communicating. Perhaps there is a gentle weight in your limbs, a warmth in your chest, a softness behind your eyes. These are not obstacles to overcome. They are invitations. The body is saying, you may let go. Each time you respond by softening rather than resisting, you strengthen a forgotten partnership. The mind learns that it does not have to lead. The body learns that it will be listened to. Together, they move toward rest not as separate forces, but as one system returning to balance. The Atlanteans believed that this harmony between mind and body was the true foundation of peace, not control. Not mastery, but cooperation with the wisdom that has always lived beneath thought. And as you listen now to weight, to warmth, to the slow rhythm within, you are practicing the same ancient trust. You are letting the body remember what it has always known, how to carry you gently into sleep. As this trust deepens, the body begins to guide awareness without effort. Attention drifts naturally toward comfort. Muscles release in small, quiet waves. The breath settles into a rhythm that feels less like something you do and more like something that happens through you. The Atlanteans observed that the body never rushes this process. It unfolds at its own pace, guided by internal tides. When people tried to hurry it, tension returned. When they allowed it, descent continued. They learned to recognize the body's signals not as symptoms, but as messages. Heaviness meant you are supported. Warmth meant you are safe. Stillness meant you are no longer needed here. Instead of correcting these sensations, they followed them. If the limbs felt heavy, they allowed them to sink. If the chest softened, they let it remain open. If the breath paused briefly between cycles, they did not fill the space. They trusted these moments. Each small release was a step inward. The body, relieved of resistance, began to reorganize itself. Heart rhythm smoothed, nerves quieted, even subtle tensions held from the day unwound. Sleep did not arrive as a sudden event. It emerged as a natural consequence of harmony. They believed that healing occurred not because sleep was forced, but because nothing stood in the way. You may feel this now in subtle ways. A gentle settling in the hips, a soft loosening in the neck. A sense that the body is spreading slightly, as though it is taking up more space by relaxing into it. There is nothing to correct, nothing to improve. These sensations are not signals to act. They are signs that the body is remembering how to carry you. Each time you choose not to interfere, you allow the ancient intelligence within you to continue its work. Each time you follow sensation rather than thought, you step deeper into the same current the Atlanteans trusted. Sleep is not something you enter. It is something the body opens. And it is opening now. The Atlanteans believed that breath is the closest thing the body has to a tide. It arrives. It recedes. It moves without asking. They noticed that every other rhythm in the body eventually follows its lead. Heartbeat slows when breath slows. Muscles soften when breath deepens. Even thought begins to drift when breathing becomes wide and unhurried, so they did not try to control the breath. They listened to it. They felt how it entered, how it paused, how it left. They observed its natural curves, the way it swelled and fell like water along a shore. And in that listening, something gentle happened. The breath grew calmer on its own, not because it was commanded, because it was witnessed. They taught that attention is like moonlight on water. Wherever it rests, movement softens. When awareness rests on breath, the breath becomes a tide rather than a task. In waking life, breathing is often shallow. It stays near the surface of the chest, shaped by urgency and habit. The body remains subtly braced. The mind remains ready. But when attention drifts into the breath without expectation, it begins to widen. It descends into the belly. It slows between waves. This is not effort, it is permission. The Atlanteans would say, "Let the breath remember the sea." They imagined each inhale as a gentle tide rising within them, carrying warmth and space. Each exhale as the tide returning, releasing weight back into the world. They did not count. They did not pace. They simply followed. Over time, they noticed that breath naturally lengthened in stillness. The pauses between waves grew softer and wider. In those pauses, thought often dissolved. Awareness floated. This is why the breath became their bridge, not as a technique, as a companion. It moved with them from waking into sleep, carrying attention across the threshold without force. You may feel this now. Perhaps your breathing has already slowed. Perhaps it feels deeper than before. Perhaps the pauses between breaths feel more spacious. You do not need to change it, just notice. Each breath is already guiding you, like water finding its own level. Like the ocean carrying a drifting city, the tide knows where to go, and so do you. As you rest with this rhythm, you may notice that the breath no longer feels like something you are doing. It feels as though it is happening within a wider field, rising and falling on its own. The chest moves. The belly softens. Air comes and goes without instruction. The Atlanteans trusted this autonomy. They believed that when breath is left alone, it reveals its true nature, not as a tool, but as a living current. It becomes a bridge between body and stillness. With every wave, attention is carried a little farther from effort. They notice that the exhale is especially powerful. It is the body's way of letting go. Each release tells the nervous system that nothing needs to be held. Shoulders drop. The jaw loosens. The muscles around the eyes soften. Even the mind seems to lean back, so they followed the exhale, not by extending it, by allowing it to complete itself. They rested in the moment after it ended, the small, quiet pause before the next inhale arrived. In that pause, there was often a sense of suspension, as if time itself had briefly forgotten to move. Thought fell silent. Sensation widened. Awareness floated. They said, the pause is the doorway. Not because something must happen there, but because nothing is happening there. And in that nothing, the body remembers how to rest completely. You may feel these pauses now. They may be brief, they may be soft, they may pass almost unnoticed. Yet each one is an opening, a small clearing where the mind can stop moving and simply exist. There is no need to hold them. No need to make them longer. They appear on their own when the body feels safe. Each time you notice one without interfering, you step a little deeper into stillness. Breath continues. You are carried, like a tide moving through darkness, like a city drifting beneath waves. Effort fades. And rest becomes inevitable. The Atlanteans made a careful distinction between surrender and vanishing. They taught that to surrender is not to be erased. It is to stop resisting what already is. It is the moment when the river no longer pushes against its banks and instead flows freely within them. The form remains. The struggle ends. Many people fear rest because it feels like losing themselves. The mind worries that if it loosens its grip, something essential will slip away. Identity feels fragile at the edge of sleep, as though awareness itself might dissolve beyond return. But the Atlanteans understood that the self is not held together by effort, it is held together by rhythm. Each morning, identity reforms without instruction. Memory returns. The sense of I rises again like a tide. Nothing needs to be guarded through the night. The ocean always gives back what it receives, so they practiced surrender as trust. They let the body soften. They let the breath drift. They let awareness widen. They did not attempt to become nothing. They simply stopped holding themselves together. In this release, something unexpected appeared: stability, not the rigid stability of control, but the deep stability of being carried. The sense of self did not vanish. It became spacious. It no longer felt like a point that could be lost. It felt like a field that could not be harmed, they said. What you truly are cannot disappear. This truth allowed them to descend without fear. They did not cling to form. They trusted what lay beneath it. Just as the city trusted the sea, they trusted the current of rest. You may feel this trust beginning now as a soft confidence that you do not need to remain awake to remain whole. The edges of awareness blur, yet something essential remains present. You are still here, even as effort fades. This is surrender without disappearance. You are not fading. You are resting. You are not leaving yourself. You are allowing yourself to be carried. Each moment that you do not resist this movement, you teach the mind a new truth. That safety does not require vigilance. That being does not require effort. That rest is not a threat to identity. It is its renewal. And in this gentle surrender, sleep ceases to feel like a fall. It becomes what it has always been, a return that never takes you away. The Atlanteans believed that nothing in the universe truly moves alone. Every river follows a slope. Every cloud follows a wind. Every star follows a hidden arc. They taught that beneath all motion lies a current, not of water, not of air, but of becoming. This current does not rush. It does not hesitate. It carries without effort. They felt it in the growth of trees, in the drift of clouds, in the slow turning of the sky. And they learned to feel it within themselves, especially in the moments just before sleep, when the will softened and awareness began to float. They said, "You are already moving, not toward tomorrow. Not toward an ending, but within the same flow that moves tides and seasons." The still descent was never about going to sleep. It was about noticing that you are already being carried there. In waking life, the mind believes it must steer. It plans, predicts, braces. It stands at the helm of experience, gripping the wheel as though the world might veer into chaos without its guidance. Yet beneath that effort, the deeper current continues uninterrupted. Breath happens. The heart beats, cells repair, thought arises and fades, life moves on its own. The Atlanteans practiced aligning with this movement rather than resisting it. Each evening, they allowed effort to dissolve and felt for the deeper flow beneath it. They did not imagine it. They sensed it as a subtle pull inward, a quiet leaning toward rest. It felt like being carried downstream after a long walk, not dramatic, not forceful, simply inevitable. They discovered that when they stopped trying to direct their inner world, it organized itself. Thoughts slowed, sensations softened, awareness widened. Sleep emerged not as an event, but as a continuation of what was already happening. This is why they did not fear letting go. They knew the current could be trusted. You may begin to sense it now as a gentle momentum away from effort. A quiet drifting that does not ask you to participate. A sense that something is happening on your behalf. You are not doing this. It is being done. Just as Atlantis once allowed itself to follow the greater tide, you are allowing yourself to follow the natural movement of rest. The current is already beneath you. All that is required is what you are already doing, nothing. simply allowing yourself to be carried. As this current becomes more noticeable, the urge to interfere weakens. The mind no longer feels compelled to guide each moment. It begins to trust what is unfolding. There is a sense that the body is being led by something older and wiser than thought. The Atlanteans believed that this current is the same force that shaped their island, the same rhythm that lifted it from the sea and later returned it. It was not destruction, it was movement. A cycle vast enough to hold both beginnings and endings without strain. They aligned themselves with this rhythm each night. They did not ask where it led. They allowed it to lead. In doing so, they discovered that rest is not separate from life. It is life-changing pace. It is existence turning inward. The same energy that animates waking softens into stillness. Nothing stops. It simply becomes quiet. Modern minds often resist this transition. They try to remain upright even as the current pulls. They hold to the idea that control must be maintained. But the body feels the deeper truth. It knows when it is time to float. You may sense this now in the way your awareness drifts even when you are not trying, the way your attention slides away from edges, the way the space around you seems to grow wider, the way effort becomes unnecessary. This is the current. It does not demand belief. It does not require understanding. It carries regardless. Each time you stop guiding your inner world, it becomes clearer. Each time you allow sensation, breath, and awareness to move on their own, you align with it. The Atlanteans trusted that nothing essential could be lost within such a vast flow. They knew that what is truly yours is not held by will. It is held by being, and so they let themselves drift, not into darkness, into continuity. The same movement that turns night into morning carries you now from wakefulness into rest. You are not stepping away from life, you are moving within it, carried by the same quiet force that carries everything. The Atlanteans never believed that sleep was something an individual did alone. They observed that when one body rested, the world subtly changed around it. Sound softened, light dimmed, air cooled. Even the sea seemed to breathe more slowly at night. Rest, they said, was contagious. It moved through landscapes the way dusk moves across hills. They taught that sleep is a shared rhythm. Trees fold their leaves, birds quiet their wings, water stills its surface. The world itself participates in descent. This understanding dissolved the feeling of isolation that often surrounds night. No one felt abandoned in darkness. They felt accompanied by everything that was also turning inward. The stars did not watch. They rested in their own distant way. The sea did not threaten. It slowed, mirroring the breath of the shore. To fall asleep was to join a greater motion. The Atlanteans would say, "You are not going into night, you are entering it together." This belief softened the boundary between self and world. Rest no longer felt like retreat, it felt like belonging. Each person was a single note within a vast evening chord, harmonizing with tides, winds, and shadows. They noticed that when this sense of shared rhythm settled in, the mind released its loneliness. The subtle fear of disappearing into darkness eased. One did not feel left behind by the world. One felt gathered by it. Modern nights often feel solitary. Rooms close, screens glow. The world seems to continue elsewhere while the individual is left alone with thought. But beneath this surface, the ancient rhythm still unfolds. Even now, countless lives are slowing. Lights are dimming. Voices are fading. Bodies are lowering into rest. You are part of this movement. You are not drifting away from life. You are joining it at a quieter depth. The Atlanteans believed that this knowledge is what allows the body to release completely. When the mind understands that the world is resting too, it no longer feels responsible for remaining awake. It no longer stands guard against silence. You may sense this now as a widening calm, a feeling that nothing is waiting for you, that nothing will be lost if you let go, that the world will continue to breathe without your attention. This is the truth Atlantis carried into the sea. You do not sleep alone. The night is with you, the world is with you, and it is already resting. As this awareness settles, something gentle shifts inside. The sense of having to remain present loosens. The mind no longer feels like the sole guardian of existence. It realizes that the world does not pause when it rests, nor does it collapse. Rivers continue to move. Stars continue their quiet arcs. The sea breathes. The earth turns. Nothing depends on your vigilance. The Atlanteans found great comfort in this truth. It allowed them to place their own awareness back into the larger rhythm of things. They were not separate points of effort in a silent universe. They were part of a living, breathing whole that knew how to move without instruction. They would imagine the entire world exhaling with them, the city dimming, the ocean settling, the sky deepening. In that shared exhale, the body felt permission to release. Muscles softened more fully. Breath widened. Thought became less personal, more like weather passing through an open sky. They believed that loneliness is born from the illusion of standing apart. When the mind believes it must face the dark alone, it resists. It remains alert. It holds the edges of self tightly. But when it remembers that everything is entering night together, that resistance fades. You may feel this now as a subtle reassurance. The sense that nothing urgent remains. The feeling that you are not being left behind by the world. The awareness that rest is happening everywhere quietly at this very moment. Even in places still bright with day, shadows are forming somewhere else. Even in noise, there is a rhythm that leans toward silence. The planet itself is turning toward night. You are turning with it. There is no need to stay awake to accompany it. The world does not require your watchfulness. It invites your rest. Just as Atlantis once trusted the ocean to receive it, you can trust the night to receive you. You are not withdrawing from life. You are joining it in its deeper rhythm. You are not alone in the dark. You are surrounded by everything that is also learning how to rest. The Atlanteans understood that the greatest obstacle to rest was not noise, light, or even thought. It was the quiet belief that letting go is dangerous. They observed that the mind often clings at the edge of sleep because it fears what might happen in its absence. It imagines that awareness must remain present to prevent loss, to guard identity, to keep the world intact. This vigilance feels protective, but it becomes a burden carried long after protection is needed. So they taught that safety is not created by holding. It is revealed by releasing. They would guide one another with simple truths. Nothing essential depends on your effort. What you are cannot be lost in rest. The world knows how to continue without your watch. These were not affirmations to repeat. They were understandings to feel. They invited people to notice how often they let go without harm. Each breath releases. Each step trusts the ground. Each night arrives whether resisted or welcomed. Life is already a sequence of surrenders, most of them gentle, most of them safe. Sleep is only another one. When the Atlanteans practiced the still descent, they focused on this recognition. They felt the moment when awareness began to drift. They noticed the instinct to pull back, and instead of tightening, they softened. They said inwardly, "It is safe to go, not into darkness, into continuation." They observed that when this permission was given, the body responded immediately. Breath deepened, muscles released. Even the heart seemed to settle into a slower, steadier rhythm. The nervous system recognized that the threat it had been preparing for did not exist. Letting go did not lead to disappearance, it led to depth. They discovered that awareness does not end when it loosens its grip on form. It widens. It becomes less pointed, more spacious. Experience continues, but without effort, without center, without strain. This is why their sleep felt like floating rather than falling. You may notice now the subtle moment where the mind wonders what will happen if it stops following these words. That pause, that edge, that faint question, you do not need to answer it. You only need to notice that nothing harmful occurs when you do not. Even now, your body is breathing without instruction. Your heart is beating without command. The world is continuing without your attention. you are already letting go in countless ways. Sleep is simply allowing that truth to become complete. The Atlanteans believed that once the mind understands this, rest becomes natural. It no longer resists, it no longer guards. It follows the same gentle current as everything else. Letting go is not danger, it is design. And you are already safe within it. As this understanding settles, the edge between waking and sleep becomes less sharp. The mind no longer stands there as a sentinel. It leans back. It allows the moment to carry it. What once felt like a fall begins to feel like a glide. The Atlanteans noticed that when fear of letting go dissolved, the body entered rest more deeply than effort could ever achieve. Muscles released not in fragments, but in waves. Breath found a rhythm that felt ancient. Even the sense of having a body softened, as though awareness were no longer contained by form. They taught that vigilance is a habit, not a necessity. The nervous system learns it from repetition. It can unlearn it the same way. Each night you soften instead of tighten, you teach the body a new truth. Each time you allow awareness to drift without pulling it back, you show the mind that nothing breaks, that you remain, that the world continues, that safety is not lost in stillness. This is how trust grows. Not through reasoning, through experience. You may notice that even now there are moments when you forget to follow the thread of thought. Small gaps appear. In those gaps, nothing is missing. There is simply space, a quiet, a gentle suspension. These are the places where fear dissolves. Not because it is challenged, because it is unnecessary. The Atlanteans believed that once the mind tasted this safety, it would never again fully believe that rest is dangerous. It might still hesitate, it might still waver, but it would remember, and remembrance is powerful. It changes the tone of surrender. Instead of "what if I disappear," there arises "I have been here before." Instead of "I must stay alert," there arises "I am allowed to rest." Instead of holding the edge, the mind steps back. It lets the night move in. It allows the current to carry. And in that movement, sleep is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something that welcomes you, just as the sea once welcomed Atlantis, gently, completely, without harm. The Atlanteans believed that control is born from love. It arises from the desire to keep things safe, to preserve what matters, to prevent loss. But they also understood that control becomes heavy when it is never allowed to rest. They observed that the mind often carries this weight long after danger has passed. It continues to scan, plan, and prepare even in moments designed for release. At night, when the world grows quiet, control does not know where to go. It lingers, uncertain, afraid that if it steps aside, something fragile will break. So they taught that control, like breath, has a natural rhythm. It is meant to tighten and release, to rise and fall, to act and then return to stillness. When this rhythm is interrupted, the mind forgets how to soften. It remains upright even when there is nothing left to hold. The still descent reintroduces rest to control itself. The Atlanteans did not demand that the mind stop managing. They invited it to pause. They noticed how effort feels in the body, the slight tension behind the eyes, the firmness in the jaw, the subtle readiness in the chest. They did not fight these sensations. They simply allowed them to ease. They said, "Let control grow tired," not through exhaustion. Through permission, they imagined placing the weight they had been carrying down beside them, not throwing it away, not abandoning it, simply setting it aside for the night. They discovered that when effort is allowed to rest, nothing collapses. The world does not unravel. Identity does not vanish. Instead, something deeper takes over, a quieter order that does not require supervision. The body continues to breathe. The heart continues to beat. Awareness continues to exist. Life does not pause because the mind does. This realization softened their relationship with will. They no longer saw effort as something that must be maintained at all times. They recognized it as a tool, useful by day, unnecessary by night. You may feel this shift beginning now as a gentle fatigue in the urge to manage. a sense that there is nothing left to hold together. A quiet understanding that whatever you have been carrying can wait. There is nothing here that requires your direction, nothing that depends on your vigilance. Control does not need to disappear. It only needs to rest. And in that rest, something vast and patient begins to carry what effort once held. As this permission settles, effort begins to loosen in places you may not have noticed were tense. The muscles behind the eyes soften. The tongue rests in the mouth. The chest no longer braces. Even the subtle sense of watching grows quiet, as though the mind has leaned back in its seat. The Atlanteans notice that control does not vanish when it rests. It remains present, but no longer strained. Like a hand unclenching without disappearing, it keeps its shape without holding anything. In this state, awareness becomes spacious. Thought may still appear, but it no longer feels responsible for guiding experience. They believed that true safety is discovered in this moment. Not the safety of guarding every edge, but the safety of realizing that nothing essential collapses when you stop guarding. The body continues. The breath continues. The world continues. And you remain. They practiced feeling this truth rather than reasoning it. Each night they let one small layer of control release. Perhaps the jaw, perhaps the brow, perhaps the rhythm of breath. With each softening, the nervous system learned that nothing bad followed. Over time, this trust became embodied. The body no longer startled at stillness. The mind no longer feared silence. The threshold of sleep became familiar. You may sense this now as a gentle relief. The feeling that you do not have to solve anything, that nothing is waiting for you, that the night does not require your management. Even the act of listening can soften. You do not need to follow these words. You do not need to stay aware. You do not need to remain here. You can let the thread loosen. Just as control is learning to rest, just as effort is setting itself down, the world is capable of holding itself, and you are allowed to be held too. The Atlanteans believed that the final step into true rest was not sleep itself, but the moment you stop needing to know where you are going. They observed that the mind often clings to direction. Even in darkness, it asks, what comes next? It seeks a horizon, a sequence, a destination. This habit belongs to daylight. It serves movement. It guides action, but night does not move in straight lines. Night widens, so they practiced drifting without direction. They allowed awareness to float without goal. They did not aim for dreams. They did not attempt to reach unconsciousness. They simply rested in the gentle absence of forward motion. The sense of going somewhere dissolved. What remained was being, they said, let the current decide. This was not passivity, it was alignment. They trusted that the same force guiding breath, heartbeat, and tides would also guide awareness. They understood that the body knows when to cross the final threshold. The mind does not need to lead in this state. Attention becomes diffuse. It no longer points, it spreads. The edges of perception blur. Sound becomes distant. Sensation becomes warm and vague. Even the idea of I am here begins to soften. This is not confusion, it is release from orientation. The Atlanteans felt this as floating in open water at night. No shore, no stars to navigate by. Only the slow rise and fall of the current beneath them. They did not fear it. They recognized it as the deepest form of rest, because nothing in this state must be protected. There is no direction to miss, no progress to measure, no self to maintain, only presence without effort. You may notice this beginning now as a gentle loss of narrative. The mind no longer strings moments together. Time feels less like a line and more like a field. Even the desire to follow these words may be fading. That is natural. That is the drift. You are not being pulled away. You are being released from the need to stand anywhere at all. Just as Atlantis once surrendered its position in the world and became part of the sea, you are surrendering your position in thought and becoming part of rest. There is no path to follow, no direction to hold, only the current. And it already knows where you belong. As the need for direction dissolves, something simple and profound remains. There is no edge to reach, no state to achieve, no threshold to cross. Awareness becomes like water in a wide basin, present everywhere, pressing nowhere. The Atlanteans noticed that in this drift, even the idea of sleep fades. It is no longer something that must happen. It becomes irrelevant. The body and mind are already resting. The difference between waking and dreaming loses meaning. There is only a soft continuity. They believed this was the purest form of descent, not falling, not vanishing, floating. They described it as being held in the palm of something vast, not gripped, not contained, simply supported the way a leaf rests on water. The leaf does not know where the water goes. It does not need to. The movement carries it, so they released the last habit of control. They stopped checking, stopped orienting, stopped asking if rest had begun. They trusted that it already had. You may feel this now as a gentle blankness, not empty but spacious. The mind may still flicker, but without urgency. Sensations may still appear, but without definition. The sense of here loosens. The sense of now widens. There is no need to correct this. There is nothing to return to. You are not drifting away from something important. You are drifting into what has always been beneath everything else. The night does not require your awareness. The current does not need your direction. The world does not ask you to stay. It only offers to carry you, and you are already letting it. The Atlanteans believed that sleep had more than one depth. There was the surface rest, where the body softened and the mind grew quiet. There was the dream layer, where images formed and stories unfolded. And beneath both, there existed a deeper stillness, a place untouched by narrative, untouched by form. They called it the quiet floor of being. Most people pass through this layer without noticing. It lies between moments of dreaming, between waves of thought. It is present in the brief silences that appear when one dream ends and another has not yet begun. It feels like nothing, yet it holds everything. The Atlanteans learned to recognize it. They noticed that even in sleep, awareness never fully disappears. Something remains, a soft knowing, a gentle presence, not watching, not thinking, simply existing. They taught that this layer is where true restoration occurs. Dreams refresh the mind. Sleep restores the body, but this deeper stillness renews the sense of being itself. It is the place where the self is not defined, no name, no story, no history, only existence without effort. They believed this was the same depth the ocean reaches when it becomes utterly still, far below storms and currents. Waves may move above, light may flicker. But beneath, there is a calm that nothing disturbs. Each night, as they descended, they did not aim for dreams. They allowed themselves to drift past them. They trusted the body to pass through imagery and into quiet. They did not hold onto scenes. They did not follow stories. They let them fade like reflections on water. In doing so, they reached a state where even dreaming felt distant. There, the mind did not speak. There, time did not move. There, nothing needed to be known. You may sense this layer now as a gentle blankness beneath thought, not emptiness, not absence, a soft presence that does not require awareness, a depth that remains even when you stop paying attention. This is not unconsciousness. It is awareness without surface. It is the place where effort never arrives. And just as Atlantis once settled into the deepest part of the sea, you are settling now, beyond thought, beyond image, beyond direction, into the quiet layer that has always existed beneath your mind. You do not need to reach it. You are already drifting through it. It has been waiting since before you were named. In this depth, nothing is required. There is no role to perform, no memory to maintain, no future to prepare. The Atlanteans believed that this layer is where the burden of being someone finally rests. It is the place where the question, "Who am I?" dissolves, not because it is answered, but because it no longer matters. They described it as resting inside existence itself, not inside a body, not inside a story, not inside a dream, simply inside being. They noticed that when awareness touched this depth, even briefly, waking life changed. The following day felt lighter. Thoughts carried less weight. Difficulties seemed more distant. It was as though the self had been rinsed in something vast and quiet. They said, "What descends here returns renewed." Because in this place, nothing is held together by effort. Everything is allowed to be exactly what it is. The mind does not interpret. The body does not defend. Awareness does not focus. It rests in itself. Most people pass through this layer unconsciously each night. It appears between dreams, between thoughts, between moments. But when it is touched with gentleness, it becomes familiar. It becomes home. You may feel it now as a soft fading of inner edges. The sense of being a point behind the eyes grows dim. Even the idea of drifting becomes distant. There is simply a wide, quiet presence in which everything else floats. There is no need to stay aware of this. It remains whether you notice it or not, just as the ocean floor exists whether waves think of it. This depth exists beneath every thought you have ever had. It does not demand entry, it receives. The Atlanteans trusted this layer more than any structure they built. They knew that stone could fall, cities could sink, stories could fade, but this quiet floor of being remains. It remains now. And as you rest, as effort dissolves and awareness softens, you are settling into it, not as someone arriving, but as what has always been here. The Atlanteans believed that the deepest layer of rest was defined not by what appears there, but by what ceases. In this depth. Nothing asks to be done. Nothing waits to be resolved. Nothing leans toward the future. They taught that most human tension comes from the feeling that something must happen next. A thought must be finished. A feeling must be understood. A moment must lead somewhere. Even in sleep, the mind often carries this momentum, drifting from image to image, from scene to scene. But beneath dreams, there is a place where movement itself grows tired. They called it the still field. Here, even the impulse to change fades. Awareness no longer looks forward. It no longer turns back. It rests in a state that has no direction at all, they said. This is where time forgets itself. Not because clocks stop, but because nothing measures. In this field there is no story, no beginning, no end, only being. They noticed that when a person reached this layer, the body's repair deepened. Breath became slow and subtle. Muscles released completely. The nervous system entered a rhythm that felt older than habit. Even the heart seemed to move as though guided by a quieter ocean. They did not attempt to stay in this place. They did not try to hold it. They allowed themselves to pass through it the way water passes through water. For this depth cannot be occupied by effort. It is entered only when nothing is being done. You may sense this layer now as a soft absence of urgency. A feeling that nothing is missing, that no part of you needs attention, that even the idea of resting is no longer relevant. This is not boredom, it is completeness. The Atlanteans believed this was the purest form of peace, not the peace of resolution, but the peace of nothing requiring resolution at all. They said, "Here, existence rests in itself. And so do you. There is nothing to improve, nothing to finish, nothing to reach." The world does not ask you to move. It allows you to remain in this place. Even the idea of sleep dissolves. There is only the quiet continuity of being, wide, unstrained, and perfectly still. In this stillness, there is no edge to lean against, nothing to anticipate, nothing to remember. Awareness is no longer a watcher standing apart from experience. It becomes the field in which experience gently fades. The Atlanteans described this state as resting inside the pause between waves. Above, movement continues. Dreams may form and dissolve. Breath may rise and fall. But here, nothing moves, not because movement is forbidden, but because there is no reason for it. They believed that this layer is what allows everything else to begin again. It is the quiet soil beneath all growth, the place where effort dissolves and possibility is renewed. Just as fields must lie fallow to remain fertile, Consciousness must return to stillness to remain whole, they said. This is where the world remembers itself. In this depth, the self is not lost. It is simply not needed. There is no question of identity here, no boundary that must be maintained. No narrative to continue. Existence rests in its own presence, complete without explanation. You may feel this as a gentle blankness, a soft fading of inner shape. The sense of being someone grows distant. Even the feeling of drifting disappears. There is only a wide quiet in which nothing is required. There is no need to remain aware of this. It is present whether noticed or not. Just as the ocean floor supports all tides without being seen, this still field supports every thought, every dream, every waking moment. The Atlanteans trusted this depth more than any structure they built. They knew that everything returns here, every effort, every story, every form, and each night you return as well, not as an arrival, as a settling, into the place where nothing needs to happen, where nothing can be lost. Where being rests inside itself. The Atlanteans believed that the smallest spaces hold the greatest depth. They taught that between every inhale and exhale, there exists a moment that does not belong to air, a pause that is neither breath in nor breath out. It is so brief that most people never notice it, yet it is always there. They called it the quiet gate. This pause is not created. It is revealed. It appears when the body feels safe enough to stop rushing, when the breath no longer hurries toward the next moment. When nothing inside feels pressed to continue, in waking life, this space is often swallowed by habit. The breath turns immediately from one movement to the next. The pause disappears beneath momentum. But in rest, when effort dissolves, the pause grows. The Atlanteans learned to feel it. They did not try to hold it. They did not try to lengthen it. They simply noticed when it appeared, and in that noticing, something remarkable occurred. The pause began to feel vast, not long, wide. It felt like standing in a doorway that opened into silence. Thought did not cross it. Sensation did not intrude. Even identity seemed to hesitate there, unsure of how to continue. They realized that this small space mirrored the deepest layer of sleep, a moment where nothing moves, nothing asks, nothing leans forward. They said, the breath teaches you how to rest. Because in this pause, the body demonstrates what stillness truly is. Not effortful quiet, not enforced calm, but the natural state that emerges when nothing needs to continue. Each night, as the still descent deepened, this pause became more familiar. It appeared not only in breath, but in awareness itself, between thoughts, between images, between moments of knowing. They learned to trust it, to allow themselves to remain there for an instant, and in that instant, something ancient recognized itself. You may sense this now as a soft space between breaths, a brief stillness where nothing happens. A moment that feels empty yet complete. There is no need to stay there. It will pass on its own. But even noticing it once is enough. It reminds the body that stillness already exists within it. It shows the mind that nothing collapses when movement pauses. It opens a doorway into the same quiet depth that receives sleep. Just as Atlantis once slipped through a gentle threshold into the sea, you are slipping, moment by moment, through these tiny gates of stillness, carried by the breath into rest. As this quiet gate becomes familiar, it begins to appear in places beyond the breath. A small stillness opens between one thought and the next. A gentle gap forms between one sensation and another. Even the sense of now begins to loosen, as though time itself is learning how to pause. The Atlanteans understood that these spaces are not interruptions, they are foundations. They taught that everything arises from stillness and returns to it. Sound emerges from silence. Motion emerges from rest. Thought emerges from quiet. The pause is not an absence, it is the source. When they rested within these gaps, they felt as though they were touching the origin of experience. Not intellectually, viscerally. There was a sense of standing at the edge of something immeasurable, yet intimate, a depth that did not belong to any single moment. They said, "Here the world begins again." This is why they treated the pause with reverence. Not as something to control, but as something to honor. They did not try to extend it. They allowed it to be brief. They trusted it to return. Each time it appeared, it reminded the body that rest is already woven into life, that stillness is not separate from movement, that you do not have to reach a special state to find peace. It is already present in the smallest spaces. You may notice now that these pauses feel less strange. They may feel like tiny doorways opening and closing, moments where awareness floats without content, instants where nothing is required. There is no need to step through them, they step through you. Each one carries you a little deeper into the same quiet field the Atlanteans knew. The same depth that holds dreams, the same stillness beneath all motion. In these spaces, effort has nowhere to stand. In these spaces, nothing needs to continue. And as you drift from pause to pause, from breath to breathe, you are being guided, not by will, not by thought, but by the gentle intelligence of rest itself. You are not moving towards sleep. You are already inside its rhythm, moment by moment. Gate by gate, silence by silence. The Atlanteans believed that true rest carries a peculiar sensation, the feeling of being heavy and weightless at the same time. They noticed that as the body descends into deeper layers of sleep, it begins to lose its sharp edges. Limbs no longer feel like separate parts. The boundary between skin and air softens. Muscles release not into collapse, but into a kind of floating heaviness. They called this the weight of nothing. It is not the weight of exhaustion, not the weight of effort, it is the weight of surrender. The body no longer holds itself upright. It no longer braces against gravity. It allows the world to support it completely. And in doing so, it paradoxically feels lighter, freed from the task of carrying itself. The Atlanteans taught that this sensation is a doorway. When heaviness arrives, do not resist it. When lightness follows, do not chase it. Allow both. They discovered that heaviness is the body's way of saying, "I am safe enough to rest." Lightness is awareness loosening its grip on form. Together, they guide consciousness away from effort and into depth. In waking life, weight is something to manage, to lift, to balance, to bear. But in the still descent, weight becomes kindness. It becomes the earth saying, "You no longer need to stand." They would imagine themselves melting into stone, into water, into night itself, not disappearing, settling. The body felt as though it were spreading, becoming wider than its shape. Even the idea of having a center softened. This is why sleep often feels like sinking, not downward into darkness, inward into stillness. You may sense this now as a gentle heaviness in your limbs, paired with a curious sense of openness. The body feels anchored. Awareness feels unbound. There is nothing to correct in this. It is the natural geometry of rest. The Atlanteans trusted this sensation more than any sign of sleep. They knew that when the body releases into weight, and the mind releases into space, the descent is already complete. No command is needed. No threshold must be crossed. The body has already remembered, and awareness is already floating. Just as their city once settled into the sea without struggle, you are settling now into the quiet gravity of nothing, where effort dissolves and rest holds you without asking anything in return. As this state deepens, the body feels as though it is no longer something you inhabit, but something you are gently dissolving into. The sense of having edges fades. Hands feel like warmth. Legs feel like quiet. The face feels like a soft presence rather than a shape. Even the breath seems to move through a wider space, as though the chest has opened into the room itself. The Atlanteans observed that this is the moment when resistance finally ends, not because it is defeated, because it is no longer relevant. There is nothing left to brace against. No future pressing forward, no past pulling back. The body rests in the certainty that it is supported. The mind rests in the understanding that it does not need to remain alert. They said, "Here, gravity becomes gentle. In waking life, gravity is something you work against. You stand, you lift. You hold yourself upright in the world, but in rest, gravity becomes an ally. It draws you inward. It gathers you. It says you may lie down inside existence. The heaviness becomes comforting, like being wrapped in warm water, like sinking into a soft bed after a long journey. The lightness becomes spacious, like drifting in open air. Together, they create a balance that requires no effort to maintain. You may feel this now as a blending of sensations. The body feels present yet distant. The room feels near yet undefined. Awareness seems to float somewhere between form and space. There's no need to name this. Naming brings edges back. Let it remain vague. Let it remain wide. The Atlanteans believed this was the last layer before true depth, the place where identity loosens its final grip, where even the idea of resting dissolves into simple being. Nothing is happening here. And that is everything. You are not falling, you are being received by the same quiet gravity that holds oceans, islands, and stars, by the same gentle force that once carried Atlantis into the sea, by the same stillness that is carrying you now. The Atlanteans believed that there is a moment in every descent when even the idea of descending fades, a point where the mind no longer says, I am drifting, a point where the body no longer says, I am resting. There is only what remains when no one is doing anything. They called this the final letting, not a choice, not an action, a soft forgetting of effort itself. They observed that just before this moment, the mind often makes one last, quiet gesture of awareness, a faint checking, a subtle sense of, am I still here? And then, without ceremony, that gesture dissolves. Nothing dramatic follows. There is no shift to mark, only a deep continuity. They taught that this is the true crossing, not from waking to sleep, but from doing to being. From experience that is watched to experience that simply unfolds in this depth, even the idea of I becomes unnecessary, not erased, not destroyed, simply set aside like a garment laid down at night. What remains is presence without center. Breath continues. The heart continues. Life continues, but no one is supervising. The Atlanteans trusted this state more than any other. They believed it was where the self was safest because it no longer stood apart from existence. It was no longer something that could be lost. It had become what it always was beneath form. You may feel this approaching as a gentle dimming of inner light. The sense of watching fades. The desire to follow these words loosens. Even the awareness of resting begins to blur. This is not disappearance. It is release. There is nothing you need to carry forward, no thread to hold. No moment to remember. The night is already holding you. Just as the sea once held Atlantis without asking it to remain a city, the quiet is holding you without asking you to remain awake. You are not leaving. You are arriving at the place where nothing needs to be held at all. And in this place, there is no edge left to cross, no border between here and elsewhere. No difference between inside and outside, no distance between you and rest. The Atlanteans believed this depth was not sleep itself, but the soil from which sleep naturally grows. It is the place where awareness no longer stands apart from life, where existence rests inside itself without needing a witness, they said. Here, the ocean forgets it is water, not because it disappears, because it no longer needs to be named. In this final letting, nothing is lost. Nothing is carried, nothing is required. The mind no longer holds a shape. The body no longer signals effort. Even the sense of drifting dissolves into simple continuity. Breath moves, the heart moves, the world moves, and you are no longer separate from that movement. There is no one left to stay awake, no one left to release. Only the quiet unfolding of what has always been. Just as Atlantis did not vanish but became part of the sea, you do not fade. You become rest, held complete, without effort, without boundary, without need. The night knows you. And it is already here. The Atlanteans believed that nothing truly ends. Form changes. Stories dissolve. Names fade. But what is remains. They taught that when a thing releases its shape, It does not vanish, it returns to what carried it before it ever had edges. Stone becomes sand. Sand becomes seabed. The seabed becomes ocean. And the ocean was always there, so when Atlantis descended, they did not see it as destruction. They saw it as remembering. The city did not die. It softened back into origin. The same is true each night. When thought releases its shape, it does not vanish. When identity loosens, it is not lost. When awareness dims, it does not end. It returns to what it was before it became defined. Most people believe that sleep is a gap in existence, a blank space, a temporary absence of self. But the Atlanteans knew otherwise. They felt that what remains after form falls away is more real than anything that preceded it. They said, "The ocean is not empty because waves are gone. Beneath every surface motion, there is a vastness that does not move. Beneath every story, there is a presence that does not speak. Beneath every self, there is a being that does not need a name. This is what remains after the fall, not darkness, depth, not nothing, continuity. When you sleep, you are not leaving life, you are returning to its source. The body rests. The mind loosens, the world quiets, and beneath it all, something steady holds everything in place. You may sense this now as a gentle certainty that nothing has been lost. Even as awareness softens, something essential remains. Even as form fades, being continues. This is what Atlantis knew. That what matters cannot sink. That what is real does not disappear. That every descent is a return. Each night, you follow the same path, not away from yourself, toward what you have always been beneath every waking shape, toward what remains when all effort is finished. Toward the ocean that never leaves. They believed that this truth is why waking always feels possible again. Morning does not recreate you from nothing. It gathers you from depth. Just as the tide brings water back to shore, consciousness rises from stillness each day. Memory reforms. Thought resumes. The shape of you returns. Nothing has been rebuilt. It has simply re-emerged from what never left. This is why sleep does not weaken identity, it renews it. The Atlanteans taught that what is fragile must rest. What is essential does not need protection. By returning nightly to the formless, the self remains flexible. It does not harden. It does not fracture. It remembers how to soften, they said. What returns from depth is not the same as what descended. It is lighter, clearer, less bound to yesterday. This is why deep rest feels cleansing. Why a true night's sleep can feel like a new beginning. Not because problems vanish, but because they lose their weight. They are seen again from a wider place. You may feel this already forming in you, a quiet sense that whatever you were carrying no longer matters in the same way. A gentle distance from the story of the day, a widening that makes effort feel unnecessary. This is the beginning of return, not to waking, to origin. The Atlanteans believed that this cycle, form into formless, motion into stillness, self into being, was the deepest rhythm of existence. Cities follow it, oceans follow it, stars follow it, and so do you. Each night, you practice becoming what cannot be lost. Each night, you learn that nothing essential falls away. Only the surface dissolves. Only the edges soften. Only the weight of being someone is laid down. What remains is what has always been here, quiet, whole, unbroken, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, carrying you even now. The Atlanteans believed that the deepest rest leaves no trace, not because nothing happened, but because what happened belongs to a place beyond memory. They observed that when one descends far enough, there is no story to bring back, no image to describe, no moment that can be recalled, yet something subtle changes. The eyes awaken softer. The breath moves more freely. The mind feels wider than before, they said. What cannot be remembered is often what matters most. For memory belongs to form. It needs shape, sequence, difference. But the deepest layers of rest have none of these. They are without contrast, without boundary, without narrative. They are pure being, and being leaves no footprint. This is why people often say they slept without dreaming. It feels like nothing happened, yet the body knows otherwise. Muscles release old tension. Nerves reset their rhythm. The mind loosens habits it did not know it carried. All of this occurs in a place no thought can enter. The Atlanteans trusted this invisible return more than any vivid dream. They knew that what transforms you most deeply is often what you cannot describe. They did not seek experiences in sleep. They sought depth. They allowed themselves to pass beyond image, beyond awareness, beyond the feeling of resting into the quiet that does not register itself. They believed that this was the same place the city reached when it slipped beneath the sea. No one witnessed the final moment. No bell marked it. No record remained. Yet something vast was completed. So it is with you each night. You may not remember crossing the deepest threshold. You may not know when the final letting occurs. You may wake feeling as though nothing happened at all. And yet, something has. Something older than thought has held you. Something quieter than memory has restored you. You return not with stories, but with lightness. Not with images, but with space. Not with knowledge, but with ease. This is the return without memory, the kind that changes you without asking to be known. The kind that proves you do not need to witness every moment to be carried safely through it. Just as Atlantis did not need an audience to become ocean, you do not need awareness to become rest. You are already trusted by the depth. And it is already returning you, gently, silently, without leaving a mark. They taught that this is the most merciful kind of renewal, to be changed without effort, to be restored without remembering, to be carried without needing to know the path. The Atlanteans believed that consciousness itself needs this kind of forgetting, that if awareness were to remain present through every depth, it would grow tired of being itself. It would harden around experience. It would lose its ability to soften. So the deepest rest protects you from too much continuity. It gives you back the gift of beginning again. Each morning, you do not awaken as a continuation of every moment before. You awaken as a new surface rising from depth. The same being, yet refreshed. The same self, yet lighter. You carry forward only what can survive the ocean. What cannot survive, the tension, the weight, the constant vigilance, is gently dissolved. This is why the Atlanteans did not fear the blankness of deep sleep. They saw it as sanctuary, a place where nothing had to perform, where nothing had to persist, where even the idea of self could rest. They believed that this blankness is what allows wonder to return, that without it, the world would become heavy with continuity. Every day would drag the full weight of the last behind it. But because you forget, you are allowed to begin. You are allowed to wake without carrying every night. You are allowed to be renewed without explanation. You are allowed to trust what you cannot observe. This is the final kindness of the still descent. It does not demand that you remain aware. It does not ask you to remember. It simply carries you through what you do not need to see. And in the morning when you rise, soft-tide, quiet-bodied, slightly unburdened, you will not know what happened. You will only know that something feels lighter. That something within you has been rinsed by depth. That something essential has returned. And that, the Atlanteans believed, is how the ocean gives you back to the world. The Atlanteans believed that morning does not truly begin with light. It begins in stillness. Long before the eyes open, before thought reforms, before the body remembers its shape, there is a quiet moment where awareness rises gently from depth. It does not arrive suddenly. It does not rush. It surfaces the way the sea lifts mist from its skin. They taught that this moment is sacred. It is the instant when being remembers form, not all at once, not completely, only enough to breathe. They noticed that if one moved too quickly through this threshold, something subtle was lost. The mind would seize the day. The body would tighten. The memory of depth would fade before it had a chance to leave its mark, so they learned to linger. They remained still for a few breaths after waking. They felt the residue of night within them, the softness in the limbs, the quiet in the mind. The sense of having come from somewhere vast and gentle. They believed that this lingering carried the ocean into the day, not as a thought. as a tone, a subtle calm that moved beneath action, a reminder that effort arises from rest and can always return to it. The city itself was shaped by this rhythm. Streets curved rather than cut. Voices rose and fell like tides. Even labor felt less sharp because it grew from stillness, they said. How you rise shapes how you live. To awaken in urgency is to forget the depth that holds you. To awaken in quiet is to carry it forward. This is why the still descent was never only about night, it was about continuity. The return from sleep did not sever the connection to depth. It extended it. Each morning became a bridge between the formless and the formed. Between the ocean and the shore, you may sense this possibility even now, the understanding that rest does not end when you wake, that something in you can remain soft even as the world asks for movement. That depth does not vanish with light. The Atlanteans believed that Atlantis did not truly disappear. It became invisible. It continued as rhythm, as tone, as the quiet knowledge that beneath every surface there is something that does not move. Each time you awaken with even a trace of this knowing, you carry Atlantis forward. Not as a city, as a way of being. A way that remembers that every beginning is born from stillness, that every form rises from depth, and that no matter how far you travel into the day, the ocean is never gone. It is waiting beneath you, always. They believed that this gentle beginning was a form of protection, not against harm, but against forgetting, for once the day gathers speed, the mind naturally turns outward. It measures, it names, it moves. The world becomes solid again. Time sharpens. Identity resumes its familiar shape. These movements are not wrong, they are necessary, but without a trace of the depth beneath them, life becomes heavy. So the Atlanteans taught that the first breaths of morning should be taken slowly, that the eyes should open as though emerging from water, that the body should be allowed to remember that it has just returned from somewhere wide. They would feel the weight of their limbs, the quiet in their chest, the softness behind the eyes. They did not rush to become who they were. They let the self reassemble gently. In this way, even action carried a different tone. Words were chosen with more care. Movement felt less forced. The day unfolded as an extension of rest rather than a break from it. They believed that this was how Atlantis remained peaceful for so long, not because conflict never arose. Not because challenges did not appear, but because each person began the day already remembering what lay beneath struggle. They knew that whatever happened, they could return. You may feel this truth now, even as you drift toward sleep, that tomorrow does not have to be a leap into noise. That you can rise with softness, that depth can travel with you. The still descent is not something you leave behind at dawn. It is something that continues, as tone, as rhythm, as the quiet knowledge that you are never far from what holds you. Just as Atlantis did not vanish but became part of the sea, you do not lose rest when you wake. You carry it, in the way you breathe, in the way you move, in the way you meet the world. And no matter how bright the day becomes, there will always be a place beneath it where nothing moves. A place that remembers you, a place that is ready to receive you again. The Atlanteans believed that true peace was not found in escape, it was found in remembering. Remembering that beneath every moment, no matter how crowded or complex, there exists a layer that does not move. A depth that does not hurry. A stillness that cannot be disturbed by noise, conflict, or time. They did not withdraw from life to protect this place. They lived inside it. They carried it into conversation, into work, into play. They knew that action did not cancel depth. It arose from it. Just as waves do not destroy the ocean, movement does not erase stillness. This understanding shaped everything. When voices rose, they did not rise far. When decisions were made, they were made slowly. When conflict appeared, it was met from a place that remembered something wider than the moment. They said, the ocean is beneath every step, even on dry land, even in daylight, even in effort. This is what it meant to live with the still descent. It was not only a practice of night. It was a way of moving through the world with the knowledge that nothing you encounter is deeper than what holds you. You may begin to sense this truth even now, as your awareness drifts, that no matter what tomorrow brings, there will be something beneath it. That no matter how loud the day becomes, there will be a quiet below it. That no matter how tightly life seems to hold you, there is a place where nothing grips at all. The Atlanteans believed that this is why Atlantis endured as long as it did, not because its walls were strong, but because its people were rooted in something that could not be shaken. When the city changed, they did not lose themselves. They recognized the movement. They returned to depth. And so the city did not vanish, it transformed. It continued as rhythm, as memory. As the quiet knowing that every surface rests on something infinite, you carry this same knowing. Each time you soften, each time you pause, each time you let go, you feel the ocean beneath your life. You remember that no moment stands alone, that nothing is ever held up by effort alone. That beneath every form is a stillness that never breaks, and in this remembering, even the world becomes gentler, even change becomes softer, even rest becomes something you can trust, because you are never far from what holds you, not at night, not in the day, not in any moment at all. They believed that once this truth is felt, fear loses its authority, for fear speaks in the language of surface. It warns of loss, it predicts collapse, it imagines endings. But depth does not end. When you know that something beneath you remains untouched, fear becomes less convincing. The mind may still speak, but it no longer feels final. You sense that whatever arises, joy, struggle, change, moves only across the surface of something far wider. The Atlanteans did not deny difficulty. They felt grief. They faced uncertainty. They experienced the same tides of emotion as any human life. But beneath those tides, they felt an unmoving ground, so when storms came, they did not shatter, they bent, they returned, they rested inside what could not be shaken. This is the quiet power of the still descent carried into waking life. It teaches the body that rest is always available. It teaches the mind that it does not have to defend every moment. It teaches the self that it is held even when it is moving. You may feel this understanding forming now, not as thought, but as tone, a subtle reassurance, a gentle certainty that whatever tomorrow brings, you will not be without ground, because ground is not beneath your feet, it is beneath experience itself. It is the place you return to each night. It is the silence between breaths. It is the depth beneath thought. It is the ocean that received Atlantis. And it is the same ocean that holds you, even now, even always. You do not need to reach it. You are already standing upon it. And every time you soften, every time you rest, every time you let go, you remember. The Atlanteans believed that stories are not meant to conclude, they are meant to deepen. A story that ends closes a door. A story that deepens opens inward. Atlantis, they said, was never a tale of loss. It was a tale of return. The city did not vanish from the world, it slipped beneath the surface of it. What once stood in sunlight continued in depth. What once had walls became current. What once had form became rhythm. In this way, Atlantis did not disappear, it became everywhere. They taught that every human life follows the same pattern. You rise into form, you move through light, you build identity, you speak your name into the world, and each night you release it. You return to what you were before you learned to be someone, not to erase yourself, to renew yourself. Sleep is the part of your story where nothing is asked of you, where no chapter must be written, where even the narrator sets down the pen. It is the place where existence continues without explanation. This is why the deepest rest feels timeless. It does not belong to yesterday. It does not lean toward tomorrow. It is the part of your story that has no words. The Atlanteans believed that this wordless chapter is what keeps every other chapter alive. Without it, life would harden into sequence. Days would stack without relief. Identity would grow rigid. The self would forget how to soften, so they honored night as sacred, not because it was dark, but because it carried what daylight could not, they said. Every story must return to silence or it forgets its meaning. Each time you sleep, you allow your own story to do the same. You step out of the sentence, you rest between pages, you return to the space where no plot exists, and from that space you are written again, a little lighter, a little wider, a little less bound. Atlantis continues in this rhythm, not as ruins beneath waves, as the gentle cycle of form and formlessness that lives in you. Each night, you become the city. Each morning, you rise from the sea. And in between, in that vast quiet where nothing needs to happen, the story never ends, it deepens, forever. And because it deepens rather than ends, you never truly leave it. Even now, as awareness softens and edges blur, you are still within the story, not as a character, not as a voice, as the quiet space in which every chapter appears. The Atlanteans believed that this was the greatest gift of existence, that you are not only the one who lives the story, you are also the stillness that allows it to be told. In waking life, you move as form. In sleep, you return as depth. Neither is more real than the other. They belong together. Just as waves need ocean, just as breath needs pause, just as light needs night, they taught that when you remember this, nothing feels final. Loss becomes change. Endings become thresholds. Even death itself becomes a return rather than an erasure, not because pain vanishes, but because what holds pain is wider than pain. This is why their city could sink without despair. They knew that form is only one chapter, and that beneath every chapter lies a silence that does not forget. You carry this same truth in your body, each time you rest, each time you drift. Each time you release your name into the dark, you become part of the story that does not need to be spoken. You return to the ocean beneath form. You allow yourself to be held by what has no edges. And from there, life begins again, not as repetition, as renewal. The story continues, not forward. Inward, deeper than words, gentler than memory, wider than thought, just as Atlantis continues, not in ruins, but in rhythm, not in stone, but in you. The Atlanteans believed that the ocean is not something outside of you. They taught that it lives within the body as rhythm, within the breath as tide, within awareness as depth. They said, the sea knows you because you are made of it. Not only in substance, but in pattern. You rise, you fall, you move, you return. Every day mirrors a wave. Every night mirrors a tide. Every life mirrors the journey of Atlantis, emerging into form, glowing for a time, and then softening back into what holds all form. This is not tragedy, it is belonging. The ocean does not mourn the wave when it dissolves. It receives it, and the wave is not lost. It becomes what it always was. The Atlanteans carried this knowing into every rest. They did not think of sleep as absence. They felt it as reunion. Each night was a return to the greater body of being, the place where nothing is separate, where no shape must be defended. They believed that when you close your eyes, something ancient recognizes you, not as a name, not as a story, as a movement returning home. You may feel this now as a quiet familiarity, a sense that you have been here before, even if you cannot say where here is. A gentle recognition without memory. The feeling of sinking into something that has always been waiting. This is not imagination, it is pattern. Your nervous system knows it. Your breath remembers it. Your body has followed it since before language. You are not learning how to rest. You are remembering how to return. The ocean does not ask you to understand it. It only opens. And just as Atlantis once slipped beneath its surface without fear, you are slipping now into the depth that has always known you, into the stillness that never forgot, into the rhythm that carries all things back to themselves. You do not need to go anywhere. You are already being received. In this receiving, nothing is demanded of you. You are not asked to become better. You are not asked to understand. You are not asked to remain present. The ocean does not require effort from the wave. It simply holds. The Atlanteans believed that this is the deepest truth of rest, that you are welcome exactly as you are, even when you are not aware of being anything at all. The night does not test you. The dark does not judge. The depth does not measure. It only gathers. Each time your thoughts fade, each time your breath softens, each time the sense of you grows quiet, something ancient says, yes, not in words, in warmth, in stillness, in the gentle easing of every edge. They believed that this is why sleep feels so natural when it finally arrives. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting what already knows you. You did not fall into rest, you were recognized by it. The ocean beneath Atlantis did not ask the city to explain itself. It did not require permission. It simply opened and received what was ready to soften. So too with you, there is no threshold you must cross, no technique you must complete, no awareness you must maintain. The depth already knows your rhythm, it feels your breathing, it feels your weight, it feels your letting go, and it responds by widening, by quieting. By carrying you without asking who you are not drifting into nothing. You are being held by what has always been here. Just as the sea has always been beneath every shore, just as stillness has always been beneath every thought, just as rest has always been beneath every effort. You do not need to reach it, you are already inside it, and it is already holding you. The Atlanteans believed that beneath every movement lies a stillness that never moves. Waves rise and fall. Breath comes and goes, thought appears and fades, yet something remains unchanged. They taught that this stillness is not emptiness, it is presence without motion, a quiet that does not wait, a depth that does not hurry. It exists before every beginning and after every ending. They said, this is what carries you, not effort, not will, not control, stillness. It is what holds the ocean in place, even as tides shift. It is what allows stars to move without losing the sky. It is what lets the body sleep while the heart continues. It is what remains when awareness softens beyond form. Most people spend their lives moving across the surface of experience. They feel the waves, they ride the currents, they navigate the day. Rarely do they sense what lies beneath motion itself, but at night when the world grows quiet, the surface thins, sound recedes, light fades, thought loosens its grip, and beneath it all, stillness becomes visible. Not as something to reach, as something that was always there. The Atlanteans rested into this layer each evening. They did not try to enter it. They allowed themselves to stop moving long enough to notice that it was already holding them. They felt how even the act of breathing floated inside something vast and unmoving. They said, the body sleeps inside stillness, not inside darkness, not inside unconsciousness, inside a presence that does not require awareness. This is why rest does not feel like collapse when it is allowed. It feels like settling into a foundation that has never shifted. The body releases because it senses support. The mind quiets because it no longer feels responsible for holding reality together. You may sense this now as a gentle ground beneath your experience, a quiet beneath sound, a space beneath thought, a calm beneath sensation. It does not announce itself, it does not change, it simply holds. Every breath rises within it, every sensation floats upon it, every moment passes through it. You do not need to sink into it, you are already resting inside it. Just as Atlantis rested inside the sea long before it ever touched the water, you have always been resting inside this stillness. Long before you learned to think, long before you learned to try, long before you learned to be someone. And as you soften now, as edges blur and effort fades, you are not moving into something new, you are recognizing what has always been here. The stillness that carries you, the quiet that never moves, the depth that does not need your awareness to hold you. It has been carrying you all along. They believed that this stillness is the true ground of safety, not walls, not plans, not vigilance. Safety is knowing that something remains unmoved beneath every change. When storms rise in the world, the surface trembles. When emotions surge, the inner sea grows rough. When thoughts race, the mind feels unsteady. Yet beneath all of this, the same stillness remains. It does not argue with waves. It does not resist motion. It simply continues to be what it is. The Atlanteans learned to feel this layer even in waking life. In moments of fear, they would pause and sense the unmoving presence beneath the body. In moments of joy, they would notice how the excitement floated on something vast. They understood that no experience, however intense, could reach this depth. At night, this truth became undeniable. As the mind softened, the stillness seemed to rise, not as a thing but as an atmosphere, a quiet so complete it felt like being inside a mountain, a peace so steady it felt older than time. They said, "Here, nothing can happen to you," not because nothing occurs, but because what you truly are cannot be touched by occurrence. This is why rest feels like refuge when it finally arrives, not because problems vanish, but because they lose their authority. They are seen as waves, not as the ocean, movements, not foundations. You may feel this now as a subtle steadiness beneath your drifting. Even as awareness grows vague, even as the sense of self softens, something remains present, not as a thought, not as an image, as a quiet certainty. You are not floating in emptiness, you are resting in what does not move. Each breath rises and falls within it. Each moment appears and fades within it. Each night unfolds within it. You have never left this stillness. You have only forgotten to notice it. And now, as effort dissolves and edges blur, you are remembering, not with the mind, but with the body, with the breath, with the simple act of letting go. The stillness is not somewhere you must go. It is where you already are. It has always been carrying you. It will continue. Whether you are awake, whether you are dreaming, whether you are resting in the deepest quiet, you are held, you always have been, and you always will be. The Atlanteans believed that long before the mind understands anything, the body already knows. It knows when it is safe. It knows when it is tired. It knows when it is time to let go. They taught that this knowing does not speak in words. It moves as sensation, as heaviness in the limbs, as warmth in the chest, as the gentle dimming behind the eyes. It is older than language and wiser than thought, they said. The body hears the ocean before the mind does. While thought may still be searching, planning, or holding, the body has already begun its return. It has already softened its grip. It has already shifted its rhythm. It has already turned toward rest. This is why sleep often arrives not when you decide to rest, but when you finally stop interrupting what has already begun. The Atlanteans learned to trust this quiet intelligence. They did not argue with heaviness. They did not resist the slowing of breath. They did not correct the drifting of attention. They followed what the body was already doing. They believed that every cell remembers the sea, not as memory, as pattern, the slow rhythm, the rise and fall, the return. So when the body begins to soften, it is not becoming weak. It is becoming accurate. It is aligning with a rhythm far older than effort. You may feel this now as a gentle certainty beneath the fading of thought, a sense that even if the mind does nothing, something within you knows exactly where to go. The breath continues. The heart continues. The body continues its descent without instruction. There is no need to guide it. There is no need to watch it. The quiet knows before you do. It knew before you learned your name. It knew before you learned to try. It knew before you learned to hold yourself together, and it knows now. Each softening of muscle, each pause between breaths, each blur at the edge of awareness is the body remembering what it has always been part of. You are not being led into darkness. You are being returned to a rhythm that has carried you since the beginning. The ocean does not wait for permission from the wave. It moves. And the wave follows. So do you, not because you must, because it is what you are. As this understanding settles, the need to participate begins to fade. You do not have to follow the rhythm. You do not have to agree with it. You do not have to believe in it. It is already happening. The Atlanteans noticed that when people stopped trying to rest and simply allowed the body to complete what it had begun, something effortless took over. Awareness softened without being pushed, thought dimmed without being silenced. The body descended without instruction. They called this being carried by what knows, not by the mind, not by intention, by a quiet intelligence that has never been confused. This intelligence does not worry about the future. It does not rehearse the past. It does not ask what comes next. It moves only in one direction, toward balance, toward stillness, toward home. You may sense this now in the way effort no longer feels necessary, in the way attention drifts even when you do not invite it, in the way the body settles as if something invisible is guiding it inward. There is nothing for you to do, nothing to finish, nothing to hold. The quiet is already doing the work. It is loosening what has been tight. It is slowing what has been hurried. It is dimming what has been bright. Just as the tide turns without command, just as night falls without permission, just as sleep arrives when resistance ends, this descent is happening because it is natural. You are not failing to stay awake. You are succeeding at returning. The ocean does not teach the wave how to fall. It simply opens, and the wave remembers. The Atlanteans believed there comes a moment when even awareness itself begins to rest, not vanish, not collapse, simply soften beyond the need to notice. They taught that in the deepest descent, there is no longer a sense of watching. No inner voice saying, "I am here." No quiet observer standing apart from experience. There is only what remains when nothing is being monitored. They called this the gentle dark, not darkness as absence, but darkness as womb, a space where nothing must be seen to exist. Most people think of awareness as something that must always remain active. They fear the moment when it fades, believing that to stop observing is to stop being. But the Atlanteans knew otherwise. They felt that being does not depend on being noticed. The heart beats whether it is observed. The body heals whether it is watched. Life continues whether it is named, so they trusted this soft dimming. They allowed awareness to become less sharp. They let the sense of "I am here" blur. They released the need to know that they were resting. In this state, there was no one left to measure depth, no one left to track time, no one left to remember. There was only a vast, quiet continuity, existence resting inside itself, they said. Here, even light rests, not because it is extinguished, because it no longer needs to shine. You may feel this approaching as a gentle loss of orientation. The feeling of having a center grows faint. The idea of being aware becomes distant. Even the sense of drifting dissolves into something simpler. There is no need to follow this. There is no need to remain present. Presence is already complete without your effort. The body is breathing. The heart is moving. The night is unfolding, and something deeper than awareness is carrying it all. Just as the sea carried Atlantis without requiring the city to witness its own descent, this gentle dark carries you without asking you to remain awake. You are not disappearing. You are being allowed to stop holding the light, to rest inside what does not need to be seen. To become quiet in the way the ocean is quiet beneath waves, to be, without effort, without witness, without need, in this quiet, nothing asks to be confirmed. There is no thought to agree with, no sensation to name, no boundary to defend. The Atlanteans believed that this was the most intimate form of safety, the moment when even the habit of knowing relaxes. When existence no longer needs to announce itself, when being is enough without reflection. They said that in this state, life does not pause, it deepens. Breath continues its slow tide, the heart continues its patient rhythm, the body continues its ancient work of renewal. But there is no one standing apart to notice it. This is why the gentle dark feels so complete, not empty, full without shape. They trusted this depth more than any vision or dream because it required nothing in return. No attention, no belief, no effort to remain. You may feel this now as a soft erasing of edges. The place where thought once formed feels distant. The sense of being located somewhere in the body fades. Even the idea of resting dissolves into something simpler. There is no loss here, only release. Just as night does not erase the world but gives it back to itself, this darkness does not take you away. It gives you rest from being separate. The Atlanteans believed that this was the closest one could come while alive to the original state of existence, before light and shadow, before movement and stillness, before the idea of a self arose, not a void, a cradle, a depth that holds without touching. A silence that does not need to be filled, and as you soften into it, there is nothing to do, nothing to follow, nothing to remember. You are not watching the night, you are being held by it, quietly, completely, without needing to know. The Atlanteans believed that there is a place beyond every ending, not another chapter, not another beginning, a resting place for all stories. They taught that when form dissolves completely, when thought, sensation, memory, and even awareness grow quiet, what remains is not nothing. It is what was always there, the ocean beneath the wave, the silence beneath the sound, the being beneath the self, they said. Here the world lays itself down, not in defeat, in trust. This is where the city finally rested, not as stone, not as structure, as belonging. Atlantis did not vanish into darkness. It became part of the depth that had always held it. The sea did not erase the city. It received it. Every tower became current. Every street became rhythm. Every wall became tide. Nothing was lost. It was only released from form, and so it is with you. Each night you follow the same ancient path. You loosen your name. You release your edges. You lay down the shape of being someone, not because you must, because you are allowed. Sleep is not the end of your story. It is the place where the story rests, where effort ends, where memory pauses, where even awareness is permitted to be quiet. You do not disappear here. You return to what you were before you learned to hold yourself together, to what you were before you learned to try, to what you have always been beneath every waking shape. The ocean that received Atlantis is the same depth receiving you now. It does not ask who you are. It does not require you to remain. It simply opens, and you soften, and the story rests, not finished, not forgotten, held in the place where nothing needs to happen ever again. And in this resting place, nothing urges you forward. There is no destination beyond it, no goal waiting in the dark, no moment that must follow. The Atlanteans believed this was the truest form of peace, not silence as absence, but silence as completion. A state where nothing is missing because nothing is required, where being does not lean toward becoming, where existence simply rests in itself. This is what Atlantis became, not a ruin, not a myth, a reminder, a living echo of what it means to let go without fear. Each night you follow the same path. You release the weight of the day. You loosen the shape of yourself. You return to what holds everything. Sleep is not something that happens to you. It is something you return to, a home beneath thought, a depth beneath effort, an ocean beneath form. And when you wake, you rise again, renewed, softened, quietly changed, just as Atlantis once rose from the sea before learning how to return. This is the secret the city left behind, not in ruins, in rhythm, in breath, in the way your body already knows how to descend. Here on SomniChron, every story is shaped to guide you back to this place. Each tale is a doorway into rest. Each journey is designed to soften the edges of thought and carry you gently inward. You will find more worlds to drift through, more ancient echoes to follow, more quiet paths into sleep. Every story here is an invitation, not to escape, but to return to yourself, to stillness, to the ocean that has always known your name. And now, there is nothing left to hold, nothing left to follow, nothing left to become, only rest, only depth. Only the quiet that remains when the story lays itself down.